There is a moment, somewhere in the quiet of an ordinary night, when the mind finally stops pretending. The day is done. The phone is dark. The house has settled into itself. And something rises, not loudly, not with drama, just a low hum of everything unfinished, everything uncertain, everything you carried but could not set down. You know this feeling. Most people do. And across 25 centuries of human history, two traditions have looked at exactly this moment, this specific, private ache of a restless mind at night, and offered two very different kinds of wisdom. One says, stand firm, govern the mind, draw a line between what you control and what you don't, and stop spending yourself on the wrong side of it. The other says, soften, release the grip, let the boundary between you and the night dissolve. Gently, the way fog lifts from a field at dawn without anyone asking it to. Both of these traditions have helped millions of people find peace. Both have survived empires, translated across languages, outlasted the civilizations that first gave them form. Tonight, we are going to sit with both of them. Not to declare a winner, not to tell you which one you should follow, but to understand as clearly as we can what each tradition is actually saying and why both of them matter, perhaps more now than ever. There is a question sitting beneath all of this, and we will arrive at it slowly. It is not which path is better. It is something quieter than that, something that touches the part of you that has been waiting a long time to rest. We will get there. For now, let your body settle where it is. Let the weight of your legs and your arms and your back remind you that you are here, that you are held, that nothing needs to be decided tonight. There have always been two roads to calm. The Stoics built theirs from reason and will. The Buddhists built theirs from stillness and release. And somewhere between those two roads, somewhere in the space they share, there is a place your mind has been trying to find. The ancient Greeks had a word for the good life. They called it eudaimonia, a kind of flourishing that comes not from pleasure or comfort, but from living in accordance with something deeper in yourself. The Buddhists had their own word, dukkha, usually translated as suffering, but really it means something closer to unsatisfactoriness, a low-level friction, the feeling that something is slightly off even when nothing is obviously wrong. Both traditions began with the same honest observation, that human beings are, by nature, restless, that the mind, left to itself, tends to reach and grasp and resist and replay. And both traditions offered a path out of that restlessness. Tonight, we follow both paths, slowly, without hurry. The restlessness you feel is not a flaw. It is not a sign that you are broken or behind or doing something wrong. It is, in fact, the exact same thing the Stoics and the Buddhists were responding to when they first began to teach, which means they were teaching, in part, for you. Let that settle for a moment. The next idea will meet it. But before we continue, consider just for a moment where you are right now. not physically, internally. Is the mind reaching toward something, some resolution, some answer, some version of tomorrow that feels more certain than the one you have? Or is it bracing against something? Some fear, some change, something you cannot name but can feel as a low pressure in the chest. Both are completely human, both are completely understandable, and both are exactly what 2,500 years of wisdom have been quietly addressing. You do not have to know which one you are experiencing right now. The night will make it clearer. Chapter 2: Anxiety and the Ancient Mind. Before we go further, it helps to understand something about the world these traditions were born into. Because we sometimes imagine that anxiety is a modern invention, a product of smartphones and overloaded schedules and the particular noise of this century. And it is true that our noise is new, but the ache beneath it is not. 2,000 years ago, a Roman soldier named Marcus Aurelius sat at the edge of a military campaign, writing in a private journal that was never meant to be read. He was the most powerful man in the world, emperor of Rome, commander of its legions, responsible for the fate of millions. And he was writing, quietly and without ceremony, about his own tendency to worry, about his own scattered thoughts, about how difficult it was to stay present when the mind kept drifting toward things he could not fix. He was writing about anxiety. In 170 CE, around the same time, across a vast distance in ancient India, teachers were collecting the sayings of a man who had lived 600 years before them, a man who had given up everything, wandered homeless for years, and finally sat under a fig tree until he understood something essential about the nature of suffering. The Buddha's first teaching was not about bliss, it was about dukkha, about the subtle, pervasive restlessness that lives in even the most comfortable life. He was teaching about anxiety. In the 5th century BCE, neither of them used our modern word. Neither of them had access to neuroscience or cognitive behavioral therapy or the particular vocabulary we carry now. But they were both describing something you would recognize immediately if you read their words tonight. Think about that for a moment. The mind that keeps you awake tonight, circling the same worry, replaying the same conversation, running the same calculation on tomorrow's uncertainties, is recognizable to a Roman emperor who died nearly 2,000 years ago. Recognizable to a teacher who walked the roads of ancient India 5 centuries before that. The restlessness did not begin with your particular circumstances. It is not a product of this era or this economy or this specific difficulty you are carrying. It is, in some fundamental way, part of what it means to have a human mind. A mind that is aware enough to anticipate, to remember, to imagine, to rehearse. That recognition is not discouraging. It is, in its way, a form of company. Because those ancient minds did not simply suffer the restlessness, they turned their attention toward it. They asked what it was, where it came from, whether it was possible to find peace not by eliminating difficulty, but by changing the mind's relationship to it. and they left their answers for you. The Stoic tradition began in Athens around 300 BCE with a man named Zeno of Citium. He had been a merchant. His ship sank. He lost everything. And standing in the ruins of what he thought his life would be, he walked into a bookshop, picked up a text about the philosopher Socrates, and felt something shift. He began to teach. Not in a grand school, but in a painted porch, a stoa, in the heart of the city. That is where the name comes from. The Stoics were the people of the porch. What Zeno taught and what Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and Seneca refined over centuries was this: that the mind suffers not from the things that happen to it, but from the judgments it makes about those things. A ship sinks. That is an event. But whether you are destroyed by it or transformed by it depends on what you decide the sinking means. The Buddhists arrived at something similar from a different direction. The Buddha, born Siddhartha Gautama into wealth and comfort, watched a sick man, an old man, a corpse, and a wandering monk pass before him and felt his world crack open. Not because suffering was new, but because he had been shielded from it, and the sight of it was enough to make him ask, "Is there a way out?" He spent years looking. He tried extreme asceticism, fasting, physical hardship, sleeping on stones. He found that it did not work. He tried indulgence. That did not work either. And then he sat, simply sat, and something became clear. What became clear was this: that suffering arises not from events, but from craving, from the mind's constant reaching toward what it wants, away from what it fears. And that peace is not the absence of difficulty. It is the release of the grip. Two traditions, two diagnoses, both pointing at the same wound. Notice where your breath is right now. Let it move without effort. The story continues from here. Chapter 3, The Stoic Inner Citadel. The central image of Stoic philosophy is not a throne, not a battlefield, not a mountain. It is a room. Marcus Aurelius called it the inner citadel, a private, protected space inside the self that no external force can enter without permission. You can lose your wealth, your reputation, your health, your freedom, but the inner citadel remains. It is not where you keep your comfort, it is where you keep your capacity to choose. This is the foundation of everything the Stoics built. Epictetus, who had been enslaved for much of his life, understood this better than almost anyone. He once said, and this is a line worth sitting with, that some things are in our power and some things are not. What is in our power is our judgment, our impulse, our desire, our aversion. Everything else, reputation, wealth, the body, even death, is not in our power. He was not saying those things do not matter. He was saying they are not yours to control. And the suffering that comes from trying to control what you cannot is one of the great quiet wastages of a human life. He learned this not from books, but from the particular texture of a life without power. When you are enslaved, the list of things you cannot control is very long. And Epictetus, in living that reality, discovered something paradoxical, that the smaller your territory of control, the more fiercely and completely it becomes yours. He could not control who owned him. He could not control whether he was beaten. He could not control his freedom. But he could control, with extraordinary precision, how he responded, what meaning he assigned, what posture his mind took when the worst happened. And that, he taught, is everything. Now, let your jaw soften. This is not a philosophy of cold indifference. The Stoics felt deeply. Marcus Aurelius grieved his children, several of whom died young. Seneca mourned his friends, his exile, his approaching death. The point was never to stop feeling. The point was to feel without being destroyed by feeling. To hold grief the way you hold a lamp, firmly enough to carry it, gently enough not to extinguish it. There is a small detail here that changes the way the whole philosophy lands. The Stoics were not trying to become emotionless. They were trying to become what they called apatheia, a word we have misunderstood for centuries. It does not mean apathy in our sense. It means freedom from irrational passions. Freedom from the kind of emotion that has no basis in reality, that amplifies a situation beyond what is actually there. The healthy emotions remained. Equanimity, warmth, care, righteous anger, a genuine injustice, but the distorted ones, the catastrophizing, the excessive grief over things that were never ours to keep, the rage at events that were always outside our control. Those the Stoics worked patiently to quiet. Marcus Aurelius, in the cold of a military tent somewhere near the Danube, would write to himself each morning, not to posterity, not for history, for himself, a reminder repeated in different forms across years of private practice. What is actually in my control today? What am I spending on things that were never mine to fix? He was the most powerful person on earth, and he needed that daily reminder. That alone should tell us something, not about weakness, about honesty. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. The citadel is already inside you. It has always been there. We are simply learning to recognize it. And here is the small detail that changes everything. The inner citadel is not built through willpower. It is discovered through attention. Chapter 4, The Buddhist Middle Way. If the Stoic image is a citadel, solid, interior, protected, the Buddhist image is something else entirely. It is a river, not a river you dam or redirect, a river you sit beside and watch. The Buddha's teaching, after his years of searching, was not a doctrine of control. It was a doctrine of clear seeing, of understanding with great honesty and great gentleness the nature of the mind and the nature of suffering. And then allowing that understanding itself to transform how you move through life. He called it the middle way, not indulgence, not asceticism, not grasping, not pushing away, a path between the two extremes where clarity is possible. The first thing he taught was the Four Noble Truths: that suffering exists, that it has a cause, that it can cease, and that there is a path to its ceasing. These were not theological claims. They were observations, almost clinical in their structure: diagnosis, etiology, prognosis, treatment. The cause of suffering, the second noble truth, is craving, tanha in Pali, a word that means thirst. The mind thirsts for pleasure and thirsts for things to be different than they are. And when those thirsts go unquenched, as they almost always do, the result is dukkha, that low hum, that subtle friction, that feeling that something is not quite right, even when nothing is obviously wrong. Notice how close this is to the Stoic insight. The Stoics said, "Suffering comes from our judgments about events." The Buddhists said, "Suffering comes from our craving and aversion." Both are pointing at something internal, not at the world itself, but at the mind's relationship to the world. And yet the paths they prescribe are different. The Stoic says, "Reason your way to right judgment. Examine your beliefs. Distinguish what is and is not in your power, and act accordingly." The Buddhist says, "Sit. Watch. Notice the arising and passing of thoughts and feelings without identifying with them. Let the watching itself do the work." One tradition strengthens the inner observer. The other gently dissolves it. Both of them work. This is not a theoretical claim. Thousands of years of practice, and now a growing body of research, confirm that both approaches reduce suffering, improve emotional regulation, and help the mind find a kind of ease it cannot manufacture through distraction. But they feel different from the inside. And understanding that difference is the heart of what we are exploring tonight. Let your next breath be slightly slower than the last. The Buddhist path is not passive. The Buddha himself sat for days, and the effort of that sitting was immense. But the effort was not directed outward, toward changing circumstances. It was directed inward, toward seeing circumstances and the self that experiences them with greater and greater clarity. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist teacher who spent decades in exile from his homeland without losing his gentleness, described what he called resting in the nature of mind, not forcing the mind into stillness. Resting into the stillness that is already there, beneath the chatter. He wrote about feelings as clouds. They come, they go. The sky does not become a cloud, the sky remains. You are the sky. The anxious thought, the regret, the late-night worry, these are the weather. And weather, however severe, passes. The Buddhists call the practice of watching the mind mindfulness. But that word has been used in so many ways now that it has almost lost its precision. What it really means is this: paying attention to what is actually happening in the body, in the mind, in this breath, without adding a layer of story on top of it. Without the story. That is the key. And from here, we enter a different kind of quiet. Chapter 5, Control and Surrender. There is a tension in these two traditions that is worth naming directly, because it is the same tension you feel on a night when the mind will not settle. The Stoics tell you to take hold. The Buddhists tell you to let go. And lying in the dark, you might wonder which one is right. The honest answer is that the question is not quite the right question, because what the Stoics mean by take hold and what the Buddhists mean by let go are not opposites. They are two different descriptions of the same movement, approached from different directions. Epictetus, who had every reason in the world to be bitter, described the fundamental Stoic practice this way: make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. That second part, take the rest as it happens, is not so far from Buddhist release as it might seem. And the Buddhist teachers would agree that there is something worth holding. The Buddha spoke of right intention, right effort, right mindfulness. These require direction, will, a kind of applied attention that does not drift. The difference is one of emphasis and of temperament. The Stoic tradition tends to suit people who feel they are being controlled by something external, who have been spending their energy on things they cannot change and need permission, philosophical permission, backed by centuries of thought, to stop. The Stoic voice says, here is the line. On this side, your power. On that side, not yours. Spend yourself wisely. The Buddhist tradition tends to suit people who are gripping too tightly, who have been trying to manage their inner experience by force, suppressing feelings, controlling thoughts, muscling through discomfort, and need permission to soften. The Buddhist voice says, you do not have to fight this. Watch it instead. Two kinds of restlessness exist. One that wants an answer and one that wants permission. We will come back to this distinction. It matters more than it might seem right now. For now, consider where you fall. Not permanently. The answer can change from year to year or even from night to night. But tonight, in this moment, is your mind reaching for more control, or is it exhausted from controlling? The answer to that question might tell you which voice to lean toward. Let your shoulders drop. You do not have to answer it now. The night is long, and we have time. There is a story about a Roman general who lost an important battle. He came back to Rome expecting disgrace. Instead, the Senate thanked him for not despairing of the Republic. It was a strange kind of gratitude, not for winning, but for refusing to collapse. That is Stoic control. Not the control of outcomes, but the control of response. The refusal to be entirely defined by what has happened. And there is a story about a Buddhist monk who was asked by a student, "How do I deal with anger?" The monk said, "Invite it in for tea. Not suppress it, not express it, not analyze it. Welcome it. Sit with it. Let it know it has been seen. And notice what it does when it stops being pushed away." That is Buddhist release. Not the absence of feeling, but the absence of war with feeling. Something changes when you see it from this angle. Chapter 6. Desire as Restlessness. The mind at night is almost always in one of two postures. It is reaching or it is bracing. Reaching towards something it wants. A resolution, a certainty, a version of tomorrow that feels safe. Bracing against something it fears, a conversation, a loss, a slow, creeping dread that has no clear name. Both traditions speak to this. Both diagnose desire and aversion as the engine of restlessness. But they prescribe different medicines. The Stoic medicine begins with a question. Is this thing I am reaching for actually in my power? And if not, if it belongs to the category of things that circumstance, chance, or other people's choices determines, then why am I spending the quiet hours of my life on it? Seneca, who was one of the wealthiest men in Rome and also one of the most lucid writers about the poverty of a distracted life, put it this way: we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The thing we dread most rarely arrives in the form we spent our nights rehearsing. And yet, the rehearsal costs us as much as the real event would. He was not dismissing fear. He was pointing at its particular cruelty, that it makes us pay a price before anything has even happened. The Stoic practice, then, is to ask, what is actually true right now in this moment? Not what might be true, not what could become true if the worst occurs, but what is actually happening in the territory of what is real and present. Most of the time, the answer is not much. The room is quiet, the body is warm. The things I am afraid of are still in the future, which is to say, they are still not here. Notice where your body touches the surface beneath you. The present moment is always simpler than the mind makes it. The Buddhist medicine takes a different route to the same destination. Rather than examining the content of desire, asking whether it is rational, whether it is yours to pursue, the Buddhist approach examines the structure of desire itself. What does craving feel like before you attach a story to it? Just as a physical sensation in the body, where is it? What is its texture? Is it tight or diffuse? Does it contract or expand? When you look at desire this closely, something interesting happens. It loses its grip, not because you have argued against it, but because you have seen it clearly. And things we see clearly tend to stop frightening us in the way they frightened us in the dark. Think of the last time you were awake at 2 a.m, mentally running through everything that might go wrong. The rehearsal felt urgent, necessary, like preparation. But it was not preparation. It was a restless mind trying to feel in control of something that had not happened yet and might never happen at all. The mind was thirsting. And thirst, when you try to satisfy it with imagination, only grows. Both traditions offer a way to stop feeding that thirst. The Stoic says, examine the thought. The Buddhist says, watch the feeling beneath the thought. And somewhere between examining and watching, the mind can find a kind of ease. There is a reason this feels familiar, because you have already found that ease briefly in your life, in moments of genuine absorption, in moments of real rest, in moments when, for a few minutes, the reaching stopped. We are not trying to manufacture those moments. We are trying to understand why they happen, so that the understanding itself becomes a kind of permission. And that leads to the question beneath the question. Chapter 7. Suffering without self. There is a concept in Buddhist philosophy that Western audiences sometimes find difficult at first, and then, late at night, lying still, they find it strangely comforting. The concept is anatta. It is usually translated as no self or non-self, and on the surface it sounds abstract, even threatening, because most of us have spent our lives building and protecting a self. The idea that it might not exist in the way we think it does feels at first like loss, but stay with it. The Buddha was not saying you do not exist. He was saying that what you call I is not a fixed, unchanging thing. It is more like a river than a rock. It is a continuous process. Thoughts arising and passing, feelings rising and falling, perceptions shifting moment to moment. The sense of a stable, continuous self is something the mind constructs, not something it discovers. And the suffering that comes from defending that self, from protecting it and promoting it, and worrying that it is not enough, that suffering is real. But it is suffering in the service of something that was never quite what we thought it was. When the Buddhist meditator sits quietly and watches the mind, one of the first things they notice is that thoughts arise on their own. They do not always feel chosen. A memory surfaces without invitation. An emotion arrives without a clear cause. A judgment forms before there is any deliberate act of judging. The question then becomes, if these things are arising on their own, who is producing them? And if no one is producing them, if they are simply happening the way weather happens in a sky, then who is responsible for them? Who needs to be ashamed of them? The answer the Buddhist tradition offers is quietly liberating. No one. The anxious thought is not you. The self-critical voice is not you. They are phenomena arising in awareness like sounds in a quiet room. You are the awareness. not the sound. Let that distinction settle. The Stoics arrive at something adjacent from a different direction. When Epictetus asked his students to examine their impressions, their automatic reactions to events, he was asking them to create space between the event and the response, between what happened and what the mind says about what happened. In that space, he believed, is freedom. The Buddhists would say the space is not something you create, it is something you discover. It was always there. You just could not see it through the noise. But both of them are pointing at the same gap. The gap between the thing and the story about the thing. Between the sensation and the suffering. Between what is actually happening and what the mind insists it means. Notice the air moving in and out. Nothing needs to be solved right now. There is a kind of relief available in both of these insights. The Stoic relief is this: not everything that happens to you is your fault, and not everything is your problem to fix. The Buddhist relief is this: not every thought that passes through you is you. You are not responsible for the weather. Both of these reliefs are available to you tonight, at the same time, in the same quiet room. The suffering without a self is, paradoxically, easier to bear than suffering with one, because when the self is at the center of everything, when every difficulty is a reflection of your worth, every failure a verdict on your character, the weight becomes unbearable. When the self softens, not disappears, but softens, the suffering still exists. But it no longer has a target to pierce. Hold that gently. It returns later. Chapter 8. Judgment creates pain. There is a line from Marcus Aurelius that has been repeated across centuries, and it still lands with surprising force. He wrote in his private journal that his happiness depended on the quality of his thoughts, not on events, not on outcomes, not on whether the battles were won, or the senators were loyal, or the harvests were good, on the quality, the honesty, the clarity, the proportion of his own thinking. He was the most powerful man in the world, and he understood with unusual clarity that power over the external world meant very little if the internal world remained chaotic. The Stoic insight at its core is this: every event arrives neutral, naked, without inherent meaning, and then the mind clothes it in judgment. This is good, this is terrible, this is a threat, this is an ending. And it is the clothing, the judgment, that creates the emotional response, not the event. The judgment. Now, this is a radical claim, and it is worth testing carefully. Consider something minor. You are waiting for someone, and they are late. The event is time is passing without their arrival. The neutral fact, and then the judgment begins. They do not respect my time. Something must have happened. They do not really care. Or, alternatively, they are probably caught in traffic. these things happen. Two different judgments, two radically different emotional experiences, same event. The Stoics were not saying that some events are not genuinely painful. Death, loss, betrayal, these are genuinely painful. They were saying that much of what makes painful events more painful than they need to be is the layer of judgment we add on top of them, the catastrophizing, the narrative. The story that this is the worst thing, the final thing, the proof of everything we feared. This is where the Stoic practice begins, not in detachment, in examination. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "When you are disturbed by anything external, pay attention to it, not to the thing itself, to the disturbance. Because the disturbance lives not in the event, but in the space between the event and your mind." The Buddhist would recognize this immediately. The teachings on samsara, the cycle of suffering, describe a mind that is perpetually agitated by contact with the world, because it keeps adding layers of preference and aversion on top of raw experience. This is pleasant, reach for it. This is unpleasant, push it away. And the reaching and pushing generate more disturbance than the original experience would have on its own. There is a person worth imagining here. Someone who receives critical feedback at work. The facts are simple. A colleague found their proposal unclear. That is the event. Neutral, contained, but within minutes, the mind has expanded it far beyond its actual dimensions. This is proof that I am losing my edge, that others see me as past my prime, that everything I have worked for is now being quietly undermined. The event was a comment about a presentation. The suffering is an entire narrative about the trajectory of a life. They are not wrong to care about their work. They are not wrong to want to be seen clearly. But the gap between the event and the suffering is enormous. And the suffering lives entirely in the story the mind added to the event, not in the event itself. This is what Epictetus meant when he said that we suffer not from events, but from our judgments about them. The comment existed in reality. The narrative of professional collapse existed only in the mind. And the mind, at 2 a.m, does not always distinguish clearly between the two. Let your jaw soften now. Let the next breath find its own depth. There is a modern psychologist named Albert Ellis who built an entire school of therapy on this Stoic insight. He called it rational emotive behavior therapy. The core idea: it is not events that disturb people, but the beliefs they hold about events. Change the belief, and you change the emotional experience. His approach was more direct than the Stoic one, sometimes abrasively so, but the root is the same. The root is Epictetus. The root is the painted porch in Athens. The Buddhist path adds a subtlety to this. It does not stop at examining judgment. It asks, what is generating judgment in the first place? And the answer, in the Buddhist view, is the mind's fundamental orientation. its habit of seeing self and other, pleasant and unpleasant, as fixed, real, and demanding of response. When that orientation softens, through practice, through sitting, through the repeated experience of watching thoughts arise and pass without fighting them, the judgments begin to arise more slowly, less automatically, with more space around them. Both paths lead to the same clearing. One uses reason as the tool, the other uses attention. And this is why it shows up at night, because at night, when the day's noise fades, the judgments become audible. The stories the mind tells become visible. The clearing becomes possible. Chapter 9. Attachment and Emotional Pain. Sometime in your life, you have loved something, a person, a place, a version of yourself, and then lost it. Not necessarily through catastrophe, sometimes through the slow movement of time. The way a chapter ends. The way a person grows away from another person quietly, without either of them choosing it. And the pain of that loss was real, is still real, in some cases, still present in the body at certain hours of the night. Both traditions speak directly to this pain, and what they say is, in some ways, the most practical wisdom either of them offers. The Stoics describe a practice that sounds almost cold until you understand its purpose. They called it negative visualization, the deliberate imagination of loss, not to court despair, but to prevent it. To understand, before things change, how precious they already are. Marcus Aurelius practiced something similar. He would hold in mind the people he loved and remind himself that they were temporary, not to mourn them in advance, but to love them more clearly in the present. He wrote that when you kiss your child goodnight, you might remind yourself that this child is mortal, as you are mortal, as all things are mortal, not to be morbid, but to feel the full weight of the moment while it is still here. Seneca put it more plainly. He wrote about loving things in such a way that you know at every moment they can be taken, not with fear, with gratitude. Because the thing that can be taken is also the thing worth having. The Buddhist teaching on attachment arrives at a similar place, but uses different language. The second noble truth says that craving is the cause of suffering, and one form of craving is clinging, the mind's attempt to hold on to what cannot be held, to make permanent what is, by nature, impermanent. This is not a criticism of love. The Buddhist teachers do not say, "Do not love." They say, "Love without gripping, care without clinging. Feel the fullness of what this person, this moment, this life contains, without demanding that it stay. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. There is nothing to grip right now." Pema Chodron, the American Buddhist nun, described this as groundlessness, the unsettling and ultimately liberating recognition that there is no solid ground beneath any of it, that the stability we thought we were building was always a kind of beautiful fiction, and that once we stop fighting the groundlessness, something unexpected happens. We find that we can still stand on nothing. In the middle of the air, This sounds frightening. It is also, once experienced, an enormous relief, because the fear of groundlessness costs more than the groundlessness itself. The tension of holding on, the vigilance required to protect what you love from the natural movement of time, is exhausting in a way that is hard to name but impossible to miss. Consider what it feels like to sit with someone you love and find yourself already grieving them in the present moment, not because anything has happened, but because the awareness of their mortality and yours keeps inserting itself between you and the simple fact of being together. The love is real. The company is real. And yet, some part of the mind is watching the clock, counting down what remains, unable to simply be there. That vigilance is the grip, and the grip is its own kind of absence, an absence from the very moment you are trying to hold on to. Both traditions are pointing at the same release. Not a release of caring, a release of the demand that what is here stay exactly as it is, which, paradoxically, makes it easier to be fully here for what is actually here. The Stoics and the Buddhists both saw this. They both, in their different ways, offered a kind of permission to love without controlling, to care without grasping, to let things and people and versions of yourself be what they are for as long as they are, and then to let them go. This is not resignation. This is the opposite of resignation. It is full contact with life, full awareness of what you have, precisely because you have stopped pretending it will last forever. Tonight, there may be something you have been holding too tightly, not out of greed, out of love, out of the completely human unwillingness to let go of what matters. You do not have to let it go tonight, but you might allow yourself to feel how tightly you have been holding it. That awareness alone is a beginning. Chapter 10, Virtue and Inner Peace. Both traditions make a claim that sounds simple but turns out to be deep. They say that inner peace and right living are not separate things, that you cannot have one without the other, that the calm you are looking for is not found by retreating from your life, but by living it, more honestly, more fully, more in accordance with something you already know. The Stoics called this virtue arete in Greek, excellence, but not in the competitive sense. Excellence as in being what you are, fully, without compromise or self-deception. For the Stoics, the four virtues were wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline. And they were not ideals to aspire to from a distance. They were practical orientations, ways of being with yourself and the world each day that, over time, produce a kind of steadiness. Wisdom means seeing clearly. Courage means acting rightly even when it costs something. Justice means treating others as they deserve. Self-discipline means governing your impulses so that they serve your values rather than override them. None of these are dramatic. None require a mountain or a monastery. They are practiced in the ordinary texture of a day, in how you respond to an unfair comment, in whether you say what you actually believe or what is comfortable, in whether you rest when you need to rest, or push past your limits because you are afraid of what stillness contains. The Buddhists describe something similar but use different language. The Eightfold Path, the Buddha's prescription for the cessation of suffering, includes right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort. These are ethical commitments, ways of moving through the world that reduce the harm you create for yourself and for others. And the connection between ethics and peace is not incidental in the Buddhist view. The mind that acts in ways it cannot respect carries its own weight. The person who deceives, who causes harm, who acts against their own sense of what is right, that person does not sleep easily, not because of external punishment, but because the self knows. And the knowing creates a kind of internal noise that no amount of comfort can drown. But your only task right now is to notice the silence around these words. Let them settle. Let the next breath come. There is a phrase Marcus Aurelius returned to again and again in his private journal: do what nature requires. By nature, he meant the rational, social, connected nature of human beings, the part of us that knows we are meant to contribute, to be honest, to do our part. When we act in accordance with that nature, something happens. The inner conflict quiets, not because everything is perfect, but because the self is not at war with itself. This is the Stoic peace, not the peace of withdrawal, but the peace of alignment. The Buddhist peace is, at its deepest level, not so different. It is the peace that comes from acting without craving recognition, without needing the outcome to go a certain way, without requiring that others respond as you hoped. The action done for its own sake, because it is right, because it is kind, because it is what this moment asks, and then released. Both of these traditions are pointing at something your body already knows. The nights when you sleep most easily are rarely the nights when everything went perfectly. They are the nights when you acted in a way you can live with, when you told the truth about something, when you were kind without needing it acknowledged, when you did the thing you said you would do. Those nights the mind settles naturally. The inner citadel is quiet. The sky is clear of weather. This is not a coincidence. It is the oldest wisdom in both traditions. Seneca wrote about it, Epictetus taught it, and the Buddha built his entire eightfold path around it, that the quality of your actions shapes the quality of your rest, not as punishment or reward, as simple, direct consequence. The mind that acted well does not need to spend the night defending itself. That is virtue at work, not as a moral obligation, as a practical path to peace. And this is where the story turns, quietly. Chapter 11, Mindfulness before Sleep. There is a word that has traveled a long distance from its origins: mindfulness. It began in the Pali word sati, a term used in Buddhist practice to mean something like remembering or bearing in mind. Not mindfulness in the vague modern sense, but a specific quality of attention, a clear, steady, non-reactive awareness of what is actually happening right now. What the Buddha was describing was not relaxation, it was precision, a sharpening of attention to what is actually present, as opposed to what the mind is projecting onto it. And yet, in the context of sleep, this precision becomes a kind of softness, because most of what keeps us awake is not what is actually happening, it is what we are adding to what is actually happening. The room is quiet, that is what is actual. The body is tired, that is what is actual. The breath is moving, that is what is actual. And then the mind adds, but tomorrow there is the conversation, the deadline, the uncertainty, the thing left unresolved. And from that addition, the whole architecture of nighttime restlessness is built. Mindfulness, as a practice before sleep, is not about emptying the mind. That is a common misunderstanding. The mind will not empty. It will produce thoughts. That is what minds do. The practice is not to stop the thoughts, but to stop identifying with them, to watch them arise the way you might watch clouds move across a sky, and to remember, you are the sky. Let your shoulders drop now. Nothing demands your attention but this. The Stoics had their own version of this. Marcus Aurelius practiced what he called the view from above, a kind of deliberate stepping back, imagining the scope of the world and your small but meaningful place within it. When he was caught in a particular worry, he would mentally pull back, from the room to the city, from the city to the empire, from the empire to the scope of history, from history to the vast indifferent expanse of time. Not to feel small, to feel proportionate, to see the worry in its actual scale, rather than the exaggerated scale the anxious mind assigns it. This is its own form of mindfulness, not watching the contents of the mind, but adjusting the lens through which you see them. Both practices work in the same way. They create distance between the self and the thought, a little air between who you are and what you are currently experiencing. And in that air, something loosens. There is something your body has been trying to tell you, and it has been patient. We will return to this. There is a moment that happens sometimes in a long conversation with someone you trust. When the talking finally stops and you both sit quietly, not the uncomfortable silence of two people who have run out of things to say, but the easy silence of two people who no longer need to fill the air. And in that silence, something shifts. You become aware of where you are, physically, the warmth of the nearby presence, the particular light, the simple fact of being together, alive, in this specific, unrepeatable moment. That shift is presence, not manufactured, not forced. The natural result of the noise finally going quiet enough for the present to surface. The practice of mindfulness is simply learning to access that quality of attention without always waiting for the conversation to wind down. To let it become available when you need it most, which is often at night, when the requirements of the day have finally released you, and the present moment is the only place left to be. For now, consider what the night is actually like, right now, in this room or this darkness. Not what you have brought into it, what it actually is. The night is not anxious. The night does not race. The night does not rehearse conversations or catalogue regrets or run probability calculations on futures that may never arrive. The night just holds. It held Marcus Aurelius writing in his tent. It held the Buddha under the fig tree, watching the mind clear like water settling after rain. It held every tired, thoughtful person who ever lay awake wrestling with questions that the morning could not answer. And it is holding you now. You do not have to do anything with that. You do not have to practice or practice. You can simply notice it. The noticing is already the practice. Chapter 12. Death as Teacher. Both Stoicism and Buddhism spend more time thinking about death than any other philosophy Western audiences typically encounter. And this is not morbid. It is, in both traditions, one of the most practical things you can do. The Stoics called it memento mori. Remember that you will die, not as a curse or a warning, but as a clarifying tool. Because the awareness of death, held steadily and honestly, has a remarkable effect on how you spend a day. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." That is not a dark thought. That is a precise thought. A scalpel made of honesty. Because when you hold in mind that this is temporary, not as an abstract philosophical claim, but as a felt, real, present awareness, the trivial disputes lose their urgency. The things you have been deferring begin to feel undeferrable, and the people you love are more clearly, more immediately worth your full attention. Seneca wrote something similar. He said, "We act as if we have a second lifetime waiting in reserve, as if there is always more time, as if the years are bottomless. And this fiction, comfortable as it is, costs us the very life we are trying to save it for." He was writing about time, but he was also writing about attention, about the strange human habit of treating the life we have as a practice run for a life we will live better someday. The Buddhists address death through the teaching of impermanence, anicca, the recognition that everything is in motion, thoughts, feelings, circumstances, bodies, relationships, civilizations. Nothing stays. The only constant is change. This sounds like a reason to despair. The Buddhist teachers say it is a reason to be present. Let the next breath come without effort. Because if everything is impermanent, if every moment is, by its nature, passing, then this moment is not a waiting room for some better moment. It is the thing itself, complete, here, now. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote that the present moment is the only moment available to us, and it is the door to all moments. Not a poetic observation, a practical one. Because all the wisdom, all the peace, all the genuine rest available to us, it is only accessible here, not in the resolved future, not in the remembered past. Here, death, in both traditions, is the teacher that makes this concrete. Because the awareness of death removes the comfortable fiction that there is always later. There is a story about a man who received a serious medical diagnosis on an ordinary Tuesday. He walked out of the building and into a parking lot. The sky was exactly as blue as it had always been. A bird crossed the cloudless air. He noticed the warmth of sunlight on his arm. Details he had walked past 1,000 times without seeing. He said afterward that the diagnosis gave him something back, a quality of attention he had not realized he had lost. He was not glad about the diagnosis. He was surprised by what the diagnosis uncovered. That quality of attention the one mortality can restore is available without waiting for a diagnosis. It is available through the patient, honest practice of remembering that this is all temporary. This light, this breath, this evening, this life. The Stoics said it, the Buddhists said it. In different languages, from different sides of the world, and the fact that they said the same thing across thousands of miles and hundreds of years suggests it is not a philosophical position, it is an observation about what is true. Chapter 13, Impermanence and Freedom. Impermanence, when you first encounter it as an idea, can feel like a kind of grief. Everything passes. Every joy ends. Every person you love will one day be gone, or you will be gone first, and either way the holding cannot last. That is the teaching, and sitting with it for the first time can feel like loss. But there is another layer, and it is the layer both traditions want you to find. If everything is impermanent, if even the most difficult things you are facing right now are, by the nature of all things, passing, then the pain you are carrying tonight is also impermanent. The worry is passing. The regret is passing. The low hum of unease that fills the quiet hours is passing. This is not dismissal. It is not, it will all be fine. It is something more honest and more useful. This too will change. Not because the universe is benevolent, because change is the nature of everything. The Stoics said it, the Buddhists said it. Time, whatever else it does, moves. Marcus Aurelius returned to this again and again in his private journal. He would list great emperors of history, men who had held the world in their hands, and then note that they were all gone. Their power, their worries, their certainty that their era was the most significant, all of it consumed by time. And he found this not depressing, but bracing, a reminder that the scale of his own concerns was smaller than it felt. He was not diminishing himself. He was proportioning himself, fitting himself to the actual size of things. There is a moment most people recognize if they have lived long enough. You return to a neighborhood you once lived in. The streets are the same, roughly. A few of the shops have changed. But what stops you is this: the place carries no trace of you. The life you lived there, the specific worries of that season, the relationships that felt so large, the plans that seemed so critical, has passed through that place and left nothing visible behind. And you feel for a moment the particular clarity that only impermanence can produce. Not sadness, exactly. Something more precise. The recognition that eras complete themselves. That the weight you carried then was also impermanent, and that the weight you carry now is impermanent in exactly the same way. That recognition does not diminish the present weight, but it changes your relationship to it. And that changed relationship is, quietly, a form of freedom. The Buddhist teaching on impermanence serves a similar function, but it also does something more. When you really internalize the impermanence of experience, when it stops being an idea and starts being something you feel in the way a breath rises and falls, a certain grip loosens. Not the grip of caring, but the grip of insisting. The mind that insists experiences each disappointment as a violation. The mind that expects impermanence experiences disappointment as information. The difference in how those two minds feel at 2 a.m. is enormous. Notice where your breath is right now. Just that. There is a moment in certain kinds of grief when something shifts, when the loss you have been fighting finally becomes the loss you are feeling. And in that shift, painful as it is, there is a strange relief. Because you are no longer fighting the thing, you are simply experiencing it. That shift is impermanence becoming real. Both traditions are trying to bring you to that place before the grief arrives, rather than after. To help you hold things lightly, not because they do not matter, but because holding things tightly is its own form of suffering, separate from and in addition to whatever the thing itself contains. The freedom on the other side of impermanence is not indifference, it is presence. The ability to be here with what is here without demanding that it be anything other than what it is. That is a freedom that does not require circumstances to be different. It requires only a different relationship to circumstances. And that relationship, that particular quality of being with things as they are, is what both the Stoics and the Buddhists spent their lives trying to cultivate and describe. It is also what sleep requires, not the resolution of your circumstances, a different relationship to them. But there is one more piece to this. Chapter 14. The inner critic softens. At some point, probably fairly early in life, a voice developed inside you that kept score. It noticed when you did not do enough, when you said the wrong thing, when you fell short of some expectation, yours or someone else's, or a composite of all the expectations you had absorbed over decades. It was a vigilant voice, efficient, quick, and it was, in its way, trying to help, trying to protect you from failure, from rejection, from being found out. But over time, that voice may have become louder than it needed to be, or crueler, or faster to speak than to listen. Both Stoicism and Buddhism address this inner critic. They do not use that term, but they are both responding to the same phenomenon. The Stoic approach is to examine the critic's claims, to ask, is this assessment accurate? Is it rational? Is it proportional to what actually happened? When the inner critic says, you failed completely, the Stoic practice is to subject that claim to the same scrutiny you would give any other claim. What actually happened? What was in your control? What was not? Did you act in accordance with your values, even if the outcome was not what you hoped? Most of the time, the inner critic is exaggerating. It speaks in absolutes. Always, never, completely, nothing, when the truth is more nuanced and more forgiving. Let your jaw soften. Let the weight of your head settle. The Buddhist approach is different but arrives at a similar softening. Rather than examining the critic's claims, the Buddhist practice asks you to notice the critic itself, to see it as a phenomenon, a pattern of mental activity that arises as all mental phenomena arise, and that will pass as all mental phenomena pass. When you can watch the inner critic the way you watch a storm from a window, real, present, making noise, but not you, its power over you changes. Brené Brown, who spent years researching shame, found something relevant here. She discovered that the people who seemed most resilient, who lived with the most genuine sense of enoughness, were not the people who never felt self-criticism. They were the people who had developed what she called shame resilience, the ability to hear the critical voice without letting it define them, to feel the sting without treating the sting as a verdict. This is not so different from the Stoic practice of examining the critic's claims. And it is not so different from the Buddhist practice of watching the critic arise and pass. The inner critic softens when it is heard without being obeyed. When you can say silently to the voice, I hear you. I am not dismissing you, but I also do not have to let you run this night. Think of a time when you spoke to someone you love who was being unkind to themselves. A friend who had made a mistake and was cataloguing all the evidence of their inadequacy with a thoroughness that the actual mistake did not warrant. You would not argue with every item on the list. You would say something simpler, something kinder, something true. You deserve to say that same thing to yourself tonight. Not because the critical voice is wrong about everything, but because the volume it uses and the conclusions it draws are rarely proportional to the evidence. The inner critic softens not when you silence it, when you learn to hear it without being governed by it. Chapter 15. Discipline without harshness. There is a misunderstanding about both of these traditions that is worth clearing away, because it can lead people to use philosophy as another form of self-punishment. The misunderstanding goes like this. The Stoics were harsh with themselves, demanding, unyielding. The Buddhists required years of rigorous practice, monasteries, renunciation. Both traditions in this misreading are for the disciplined few, people with exceptional willpower who have left ordinary life behind. This is not what either tradition actually teaches. Epictetus taught in a very simple room. His students were not monks or military commanders. They were young men trying to understand how to live, and his method was not to demand impossible things of them. It was to help them see clearly the small choices they made every day, and to make those choices more deliberately. That is all he was asking, not perfection, deliberateness. Marcus Aurelius, for all the grandeur of his position, failed constantly at his own standards. He knew it. He wrote about it. He returned each morning to the journal not because the previous day had been perfect, but because it had not been, and he was trying again. The Meditations are not a record of Stoic success. They are a record of Stoic practice, of a man reminding himself repeatedly of what he already knew and consistently struggled to do. That is discipline without harshness, the willingness to return without cruelty, without self-flagellation, to what you actually believe. Let the next breath come slower. You are already here. The Buddhist understanding of discipline is even more explicit about this. The Buddha rejected extreme asceticism specifically because he had tried it and found that it did not work. Starving the body or depriving the mind of sleep or sensation did not produce enlightenment. It produced weakness. What produced clarity was the middle way. Consistent, modest, sustainable practice. Not heroic effort, not mortification. A daily returning to attention, to breath, to the present moment, to the quality of mind you are trying to cultivate. Thich Nhat Hanh taught this through extraordinarily ordinary images. Washing the dishes mindfully, walking between meetings without rushing, drinking tea as if it were the only cup of tea in the world. Not because the mundane is profound in some mystical sense, but because the mundane is where your life actually happens. And if you cannot be present while washing a dish, you will not suddenly become present during the moments that feel important. There is a man I want you to imagine. He built his entire life around achievement, work, productivity, measurable output. He had been busy for so long that busyness itself had become his identity. He was not lazy. He was never lazy. But he was harsh with himself in a particular way. He could never quite rest, because resting felt like falling behind, like a violation of some private compact he had made with himself about what he owed the world. And then, one Sunday, there was nothing scheduled. For the first time in decades, no one needed him by morning. The calendar was empty. He sat in a chair by the window. The silence felt enormous. And then, slowly, something else arrived. Not peace, exactly. More like the recognition that he had been confusing discipline with punishment, that the harshness he directed at himself was not making him more effective, it was making him more afraid. He was still sitting in the chair when the sun went down, and in the days that followed, he began to notice something. Without the schedule, without the urgency, without the constant push, he still got things done. Not less, sometimes more. And the quality of his attention when he worked had changed. It was sharper somehow, less anxious, more genuinely present in each task rather than already half in the next one. He had spent decades confusing motion with progress, activity with purpose. The discipline he had imposed on himself was real, but the harshness had been a kind of static interference between him and the actual work. And without the static, the signal was cleaner. This is what both traditions mean when they speak of discipline without harshness. Not the absence of rigor, the absence of the cruel inner commentary that accompanies it. The voice that says, "This is not enough, you are not enough, more, faster, better." That voice is not your coach. It is your fear wearing a productivity costume. Discipline without harshness looks like, "I am going to do this work, and when I fail, I am going to return to it. And the returning is the practice, and the practice is enough." Both traditions understood this. Both traditions offered a practice that was demanding in its consistency, but gentle in its spirit. And gentleness toward the self is not weakness. It is, both traditions agree, the only thing that actually sustains. Chapter 16. Compassion versus endurance. The Stoics admired endurance. The Buddhists cultivated compassion. And at first glance, these seem like different priorities. Endurance says, "Hold your ground. Bear what must be borne. Do not be broken by what is difficult, because the difficult things will pass, and your integrity will remain." Compassion says, "Feel what must be felt. Let the pain of others land in you. Do not insulate yourself from the suffering of the world, because connection is the ground of everything." These sound like different orientations, and in some ways they are, but both traditions, examined closely, contain both qualities. The Stoics did not advocate for cold indifference to suffering, theirs or others. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the duty of care, about his responsibility not just to endure, but to act, to help, to govern justly, to use his position to reduce the suffering of those under his care. Seneca wrote tenderly about friendship, about how a life without true connection is a life only half-lived. He was a Stoic, and he was also a man who grieved his friends, who was moved by beauty, who understood that the capacity to be affected by the world was not a weakness to be trained out, but a sign of aliveness. The endurance the Stoics praised was not numbness. It was the refusal to be destroyed, the refusal to let difficulty have the last word about who you are. And the compassion the Buddhists cultivated was not passive. The word for it in Pali is karuna, a felt, active response to suffering, not just feeling sad about another's pain, but being moved by it. being drawn toward it, allowing it to call you into action. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. There is nothing you need to do right now. The Buddha taught 4 qualities of mind that form the foundation of compassionate living. The Pali term is Brahma Viharas, divine abodes. Loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Note that equanimity is on that list, the same quality the Stoics prized. In the Buddhist understanding, you cannot sustain compassion without equanimity, the steadiness that allows you to be with suffering without being overwhelmed by it, the ground that lets you reach toward others without losing yourself. And the Stoics would recognize that ground. They spent their practice building it. So the 2 traditions are not as opposed as they first appear. The Stoic develops endurance so that they can act from a place of steadiness rather than reaction. The Buddhist cultivates compassion so that the steadiness does not become distance. Both are trying to produce a person who can be fully present with difficulty, their own and others, without being destroyed by it. The combination is not a compromise, it is a completion. Endurance without compassion becomes armor. Compassion without endurance becomes overwhelm. But the person who has both, who can stand in the middle of difficulty and still feel it, who can be moved without being capsized, that person has something that both traditions were pointing toward. You may already know what that combination feels like. You have probably experienced it in moments of genuine care. When someone you loved was in pain and you stayed, not because it was easy, not because you were certain you could help, but because leaving felt like a kind of abandonment. In those moments, you were practicing both. Without knowing the traditions, without the words, think of a doctor who works in a ward where patients do not always recover, or a parent sitting with a child through a long night of fever, or a friend who shows up again and again for someone living with grief that will not resolve quickly. These people are not indifferent. They are not numbed out. They feel deeply. And yet they do not collapse. They show up tomorrow and the day after. This is not superhuman. It is the specific combination of endurance and compassion that both traditions were describing. The steadiness that allows full feeling. The capacity to be genuinely present with suffering without losing the ability to return. People who have this quality did not arrive at it through exceptional willpower. They arrived at it the way any skill is built, through practice, through failure, through returning, through years of choosing presence over escape. And somewhere in that long practice, the 2 things, endurance and compassion, stopped feeling like opposites. They became simply how one moved through a life that mattered. That capacity was always in you. Tonight, we are simply naming it. Chapter 17, Anger in Both Traditions. Anger is one of the most honest emotions available to a human being. It is also one of the most misunderstood. Both Stoicism and Buddhism spend considerable time on anger, not because they want to eliminate it, but because they want to understand it. and the understanding they offer is one of the most useful things either tradition has to give. The Stoic view on anger was most fully articulated by Seneca, who wrote an entire essay on the subject. He observed that anger is never quite about what it appears to be about. The person who explodes over a small slight is not really responding to the slight. They are responding to everything the slight touched, the accumulated weight, the unresolved history, the gap between how things are and how they feel they should be. He also observed something else, which is that anger rarely achieves what it is trying to achieve. It seeks justice, or recognition, or the restoration of some violated order, and what it usually produces is more disruption, more damage, more distance from the thing it was reaching toward. This is not a case against anger. It is an argument for looking at anger more clearly, for asking, before you act from it, what does this anger actually want, and is acting from it the best way to get there? Marcus Aurelius asked himself similar questions in the journal. He wrote about the gap between the first flash of anger and the response, and the importance of not collapsing that gap, of using the space between feeling and action as a place to ask, is this worth it? Is this who I want to be? Let your hands open if they have been closed. The next breath comes freely. The Buddhist approach to anger begins with a different question. Not, is this worth it? But, what is this? When a Buddhist practitioner notices anger arising, the practice is not to suppress it or to express it, but to observe it, to feel it as a physical sensation. Where is it in the body? Is it hot or cold? Is it tight or diffuse? What happens to it when you look at it directly without adding a story about why it is justified? This is the T invitation again. Not suppression, not expression, presence. And what the Buddhist teachers found through centuries of this practice is that anger, watched closely and honestly, contains important information. It often marks a place where something matters, unquote, where a value was violated, where a boundary was crossed. That information is worth having. What the anger asks you to do with it, however, may not be the wisest path. There is a very old story, so old that no one is quite sure where it originated, about a samurai who came to a Zen master in a fury. He demanded to know the difference between heaven and hell. The master looked at him slowly and said, "You are a poor excuse for a samurai. Ugly, clumsy, slow." The samurai drew his sword, and the master said, "That is hell." The samurai stopped, looked at the sword in his hand, and understood. He put it away. The master said, "And that is heaven." Both traditions are not telling you not to feel anger. They are telling you that the moment between the feeling and the action is where your entire freedom lives. That moment is what the Stoics called the inner citadel, what the Buddhists call the observer mind. It is already yours. You have used it before. Tonight, it is simply available again. Chapter 18, Letting Go of outcomes. You have worked hard at something, you have planned carefully, you have done what you said you would do, and done it well, with genuine effort and genuine care. And then the outcome was not what you hoped. This happens. It happens to everyone, and it is one of the most frustrating experiences a thoughtful person can have, because it seems to violate a basic fairness. Effort should produce results. Preparation should predict outcome. Care should be rewarded. Both traditions, with great patience and great kindness, explain why this expectation creates suffering and what to do instead. The Stoic answer is their most famous teaching. You control the effort, you do not control the outcome. The outcome depends on 1,000 factors: timing, circumstance, other people's choices, luck, the unpredictable movement of events. Your virtuous action is in your power. The response to that action is not. Epictetus said this plainly. The archer has complete control over the draw, the aim, the release. The arrow's path through the air, the wind's behavior, the distance to the target, these are not in the archer's power. Do the draw perfectly. Aim truly. Release cleanly. And then let the arrow go. That last part is the practice. The letting go of the arrow. Not indifference to where it lands, not absence of hope, but a genuine internal release of the demand that it land where you planned. Because that demand, that insistence on a particular outcome, is the source of so much private suffering. Let your shoulders drop. You have already done enough today. The Buddhist teaching on outcomes runs through the concept of non-attachment. Not detachment, which is a pulling away, a creating of distance. Non-attachment is different. It is full presence with the action, full care for the outcome, and then a release of the grip on that outcome. The action taken fully, the result received as it is, not as it was supposed to be. This is sometimes described as karma in a simplified form. You act. The effects of that action unfold according to causes and conditions far too complex for you to predict or control. Your responsibility is to act rightly, to be, in Stoic terms, virtuous, to be, in Buddhist terms, in alignment with the path. What arises from that right action is beyond your jurisdiction. There is a person you might know, or you might be this person. Someone who drafts an important message, sends it carefully and honestly, and then spends the next 48 hours monitoring the silence, interpreting every delayed response, building entire narratives about what the silence means. The message was sent. That was the effort. That was the release of the arrow. What happens next belongs to the territory you cannot govern. This is not nihilism. You can send a better message. You can improve the aim. You can develop your skill, your judgment, your capacity for clear communication. All of that is in your power. But the interpretation someone else makes of your words, that lives on the other side of the line. Both traditions are asking you to draw that line honestly, not to cross it in your mind 100 times a night, trying to manage by worry what you cannot manage by will. The letting go of outcomes is not giving up. It is a very precise form of respect for the limits of your actual power and for the freedom of everything outside those limits to unfold as it will. And once you set down that particular weight, the night gets quieter, not because the outcome changes, because you stop fighting it before it arrives. There is a kind of quiet that becomes available when you genuinely release the outcome. Not a pretend release, not telling yourself you do not care when you do, a real one. The release that comes from understanding, in the bones rather than just the mind, that the result was never fully yours to control. Some people find this understanding arrives gradually, across years of practice. Others find it arrives all at once, in the wake of a loss that makes the illusion of control impossible to maintain. Either way, the understanding is the same. The effort was yours. The outcome was always shared with everything else. Timing, circumstance, the decisions of others, the particular movement of a day. You did your part. That is the only thing the archer ever truly owns. And from here, the night can be something other than a rehearsal for tomorrow. It can simply be tonight, complete in itself, quiet in its own way, holding you without requiring anything further from you. The arrow has already flown. Let it land where it lands. Chapter 19, The Self Under Question. We have been talking, gently and from different angles, about something central to both traditions, something that is worth naming directly now. Both Stoicism and Buddhism question the self, not to destroy it, not to pretend it does not exist, but to look at it more honestly than most of us were ever invited to do. The Stoic tradition does this through reason. When Marcus Aurelius asks himself what he actually controls and traces that answer to its conclusion, he finds that what he controls is very small. A sliver of experience, his judgments, his responses, his values, and how closely he lives by them. Everything else, including much of what he thought was him, including his reputation, his legacy, the impression others have of him, is not his. It belongs to the world, to circumstance, to time. This is a different kind of self than most people walk around with. Most people carry a self that includes their status, their relationships, their achievements, their memories, their plans. The Stoic self is much smaller and much sturdier for being smaller. The Buddhist tradition questions the self more fundamentally. The teaching of anatta, no self, is not saying you are nothing. It is saying that the self you think you are, the continuous, unified, stable entity you call I, is a construction, not a lie, not an illusion in the crude sense, but a construction that the mind assembles moment by moment from the flow of experience. And that construction, however useful, is not the bedrock we treat it as. Notice something interesting right now. Where are you in the darkness of this moment? Not your name or your history or your plans. Just where is the awareness that is reading these words? It is here, immediately present. without needing a biography. That immediate present awareness is what both traditions are pointing toward as the real ground of the self, not the constructed story, however true and useful and worth carrying, but the awareness that underlies the story, the sky behind the clouds. The Stoic calls it the rational faculty, the leading part of the self. The Buddhist calls it Rigpa, or Buddha nature, or simply awareness. The names differ. The pointing is the same. And here is what both traditions find when they get to the bottom of this question: that what is most essentially you is not threatened by impermanence the way your constructed self is. The awareness that notices the passing thoughts is not itself passing, it is the constant in the equation. This does not mean you are immortal or transcendent in any dramatic sense. It means that the part of you that is most real, the watching, the noticing, the simple being here, is calmer than the mind usually lets you feel. Consider what happens in moments of genuine absorption. When you are fully engaged in something, a conversation that matters, a piece of work that requires everything you have, a walk in a landscape that holds your complete attention. In those moments, the usual narrative of self falls quiet. You are not thinking about whether you are adequate, or how you are being perceived, or what you should be doing instead. You are simply here doing this. That is not the absence of the self. It is the self without the performance, the awareness without the story layered on top of it. Both traditions are pointing toward that quality of presence, not as something to achieve in extreme moments, but as something available in ordinary ones, in the breath, in the listening, in the simple act of being here, in this body, in this night, without requiring the self to be more or different than it is. And this is the two kinds of restlessness we mentioned at the beginning. One that wants an answer and one that wants permission. The self under question is what produces the second kind. The part of you that has been waiting for permission to stop being so relentlessly you, to stop maintaining the performance of the constructed self and simply rest in the awareness beneath it. Both traditions are offering that permission. You are not your reputation. You are not your plans. You are not the story of your disappointments or the list of your achievements. You are the one watching all of that, and the one watching is already calm. Chapter 20. Mental Clarity at Night. The particular quality of the mind at night is different from its quality during the day. During the day, the mind is managed. It is performing, organizing, responding, navigating. It is in contact with the demands of the world, and those demands give it structure. A problem arrives. The mind engages. A task requires completion. The mind focuses. The day provides a scaffolding. At night, the scaffolding comes down. And what remains is whatever the mind has been holding beneath the day's structure, the unprocessed, the unfinished. The things that were too large or too tender to look at directly while the day was happening. This is why the night gets louder. Not because something is wrong with you, but because the day is finally quiet enough for the real contents of your mind to surface. Both traditions recognize this, and both, in their way, treated the night as an opportunity rather than a problem. The Stoics practiced an evening review. Seneca describes it explicitly. Each night, before sleep, he would examine the day, not with self-punishment, with honest curiosity. Where did I fall short of my values? Where did I act well? What can I do differently tomorrow? He wrote about this practice as if it were normal, as if every thoughtful person should be doing it. A brief, honest accounting, not a tribunal, a conversation with himself. The point of the review was not guilt, it was clarity. To go to sleep with a clear picture of the day, rather than a vague accumulating unease that never resolved into anything specific. Let the weight of your legs remind you that you are here, breathing, still. The Buddhist practice for nighttime is different in its form, but similar in its spirit. Some traditions include a dedication of merit before sleep, a brief moment of offering whatever good you did in the day outward, beyond yourself. Not as performance, as a way of releasing the grip on the day, of letting it finish. Others practice a brief review of the mind's current state, not to solve anything, but to acknowledge it, to name what is present. Tired, worried, content, grateful, uncertain. The naming, both traditions have found, changes the relationship to the thing named. The unprocessed feeling that churns silently through the night is more difficult to carry than the feeling that has been seen and acknowledged. The mind that has been given a moment of honest attention, even a very brief moment, settles more readily than the mind that is still waiting to be heard. Think of a night when you woke at 3 a.m. with a sudden, nameless dread. You did not know exactly what you were afraid of. The feeling was real but formless, and so the mind began searching for a shape to put it in, running through the list of things that might be wrong, trying to find the source of the unease. The Stoic evening review, practiced regularly, makes those nights rarer, not because it eliminates what is difficult, but because it gives things their proper shape before sleep. The worry that was seen and honestly examined during the review does not need to surface at 3 a.m, still searching for acknowledgement. And the Buddhist practice of naming tired, worried, uncertain, grateful does something similar. It says to the feeling, I see you. You do not have to announce yourself at an inconvenient hour. You were heard before the lights went out. Both of these are extraordinarily simple practices. Neither requires special training or unusual discipline. They require only the willingness to be honest with yourself for a few minutes before sleep. To turn, briefly and without cruelty, toward what is actually there. You do not need an elaborate practice before sleep, but you might try something small. A simple question, asked without demand for a particular answer. What is actually present right now? Not what should be present, not what you wish were present. What is actually here, in the body and the mind, in this moment. Whatever the answer, tired, worried, sad, surprisingly calm, restless, dull, just let it be the answer. You do not have to fix it, you only have to see it. The mind that has been honestly seen, without judgment and without a demand for change, has a remarkable tendency to settle, not always, not immediately, but the direction is toward rest. And direction is enough. You do not need arrival tonight, just the orientation toward what is real and what is still. Chapter 21. Acceptance is not apathy. There is a misunderstanding about both traditions that can stop people from engaging with them, and it is worth addressing directly because it is an honest misunderstanding. The concern goes like this: if I accept things as they are, if I stop fighting against the difficult aspects of my life, if I release my attachment to particular outcomes, if I practice equanimity, won't I stop trying? Won't acceptance lead to passivity? To letting things that should be changed remain unchanged? It is a fair question, and both traditions have a clear answer. No, acceptance, in the Stoic sense, is not accepting that the world should stay as it is. It is accepting that the world is as it is right now at this moment, and that starting from that accurate assessment is more effective than starting from a rejection of it. Seneca was not passive. He governed, he wrote, he opposed tyrants at the cost of his life. Marcus Aurelius led armies, reformed laws, worked to reduce the suffering of people throughout his empire. Epictetus built a school and changed the lives of everyone who passed through it. They were not men who shrugged and said, "Well, things are what they are." They were men who acted, and acted more effectively, because they were not wasting energy on resentment of what could not be changed, or on control of what was outside their actual power. Acceptance cleared the channel for action. Let your breath move without effort. Nothing is being demanded of you right now. The Buddhist tradition is even more explicit about this. The Buddha acted. He taught for decades. He traveled, engaged with rulers and outcasts equally, challenged the social hierarchies of his time, and built a community of practice that outlasted every empire of his era. And the Bodhisattva ideal, the highest aspiration in Mahayana Buddhism, is not personal enlightenment. It is the vow to remain in the world across however many lifetimes it takes until all beings are free from suffering. That is not apathy. That is perhaps the most radical form of engagement possible. The difference between acceptance and apathy is motivation. Apathy does not act because it does not care. Acceptance acts because it cares deeply, and acts from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. The activist who burns with righteous rage may accomplish great things, and that rage may be entirely justified. But the activist who has cultivated equanimity beneath the engagement, who can stay when the exhaustion arrives, who can continue when the progress is slow, who can hold the long view without losing the immediate care, that person will be effective across a longer span. Both traditions knew this. Both traditions produced people who changed the world without being consumed by the need for the world to change in a particular way. You can care deeply about the outcome while releasing the demand for it. You can work hard toward a goal while accepting that you do not control whether you reach it. You can be fully engaged with your life while releasing the grip on how it turns out. This is not a comfortable position. It is a precise one. And it is available to you not through certainty or completion, but through practice. Through returning again and again to what is actually yours to govern. There is a difference worth naming between resignation and acceptance. Resignation sounds like, nothing I do matters, so I will not try. Acceptance sounds like, I will bring my full effort to this, and I will also release my attachment to the particular form the result takes. One shrinks, the other opens. Think of someone who has been trying to repair a relationship that is not fully in their power to repair. They can be honest, they can show up, they can do their part with care and without cruelty. But they cannot force understanding from someone who is not ready. They cannot manufacture the other person's willingness. At some point, acceptance is the only remaining act of genuine respect, both for themselves and for the other person's freedom. That is acceptance in practice, not giving up on the relationship, releasing the demand that it resolve on a particular timeline in a particular way. And in that release, often, something becomes possible that the grip was preventing. And that leads to the question beneath the question. Chapter 22, Craving and Control. We are getting closer to something now. There are two kinds of restlessness, and we have been approaching them from multiple directions. The first kind is the restlessness of a mind that wants more control, that feels the uncertainty of life as a threat, that keeps replaying events, planning contingencies, reviewing decisions, because the act of reviewing feels like a form of managing. This mind is not wrong to want stability, but it is going about it in a way that generates more noise than resolution. The second kind is the restlessness of a mind that has been doing everything it is supposed to do, working, providing, achieving, meeting obligations, and cannot figure out why none of it feels like enough. This mind is not lazy or ungrateful. It has confused the satisfaction of craving with the satisfaction of the self. And those are different things. The Stoics spoke to the first kind most directly. Their teachings on control, on the distinction between what is and is not in your power, address the mind that keeps reaching into territory it cannot govern. The practice, draw the line, return each time to what is actually yours. The Buddhists spoke to the second kind most directly. Their teachings on craving, on the endless, unsatisfying cycle of desire and attainment and new desire, address the mind that keeps expecting the next achievement to produce the peace the last one didn't. The practice. Notice the craving. Watch it arise. Feel how, even as you watch it, it begins to change. But both traditions understood both kinds, because they are not separate problems. They are two expressions of the same underlying pattern. The underlying pattern is this: the mind treats the present moment as insufficient. It generates a story about a better future, or a more controlled future, or a future in which some particular ache has been resolved. And it invests enormous energy in that story, while living at a slight remove from what is actually happening right now. Notice something right now: the breath moving, the body present, this moment, just as it is. It is not insufficient. It may be uncomfortable, it may be incomplete, but it is not insufficient. The Stoic practice is to ask, what is my honest inventory of this moment? What do I actually have? What is actually in my power? When you do that inventory honestly, you often find more than you expected. The Buddhist practice is to ask, what is the mind adding to this moment? What layer of story or preference or resistance is being laid over the raw experience? When you peel back that layer, even briefly, you often find a simplicity that is close to peace. Both practices require something unusual in this era. They require stopping, momentarily ceasing the reaching and the managing and the planning and the reviewing, and simply being with what is here. Not forever, not even for long, just for the length of a breath. Just enough to remember that beneath the craving and the control, there is something steadier. Both traditions called that steadiness wisdom, and they found it available to anyone willing to look. There is a particular image worth sitting with here. Imagine someone lying awake at 2 a.m, mentally running through a list of everything they owe: money, time, attention, apologies, overdue conversations, unmet obligations. The list never ends. The debt feels infinite. But here is what that person is not actually doing. They are not solving anything. They are not reducing the debt or scheduling the conversations or resolving the apologies. They are rehearsing. The mind is running the same calculations it ran an hour ago and will run again in another hour, producing no new information but consuming enormous energy. The Stoic would ask, is any of this within your power right now, in this moment, in the dark? If not, and almost none of it is, why is the mind investing so heavily in it? The Buddhist would ask, can you feel the craving itself? The mind's thirst for a resolution that the night cannot provide? Can you notice that thirst without drinking from it? Both questions, in the quiet, have a way of releasing something, not everything, but something. And something tonight is enough. Chapter 23, Silence Beneath Thought. There is a silence that exists beneath all of this. Not the silence of emptiness. Not the silence of absence. A silence that is full, that has a quality, a depth, a stillness that the mind can rest in if it stops generating noise long enough to notice it is there. Both traditions point toward this silence. They use different methods, they use different language, but the silence they are pointing at is the same silence. The Stoics did not use this kind of language often. They were more comfortable with reason and action than with mystical interiority. But Marcus Aurelius, in his more private moments, came close. He wrote about withdrawing into himself, not as escape, but as return. The inner life, when cultivated honestly, offered a kind of spaciousness that the external world, with all its demands and noise, could not give. He wrote about finding in that interior space what he needed to go back out again. The return to himself was not a retreat, it was a source. The Buddhist tradition describes this silence more explicitly. It is the nature of mind before thought, not an achievement, not something you produce through practice. Something practice reveals, like cleaning a window to let through a light that was always there. Thich Nhat Hanh described this as the kingdom of God within you, borrowing language from another tradition, but pointing at something he recognized across all of them: the stillness that does not require conditions, the peace that is not made from circumstances. Let your next breath come slowly, without effort. The ordinary mind, the one most of us spend most of our time inhabiting, does not experience this silence easily. It is too busy. It is too identified with its own contents, its thoughts, its worries, its plans, its memories. It treats the noise as me rather than as weather passing through a sky. But in certain moments, the noise pauses. In the moment just after waking, before the day's agenda reasserts itself. In the moment after genuine exertion, when the body is satisfied and the mind has not yet resumed its schedule. In the moment when something beautiful lands, a piece of music, a landscape, a face you love, and the mind, just for a second, forgets to keep score. In those moments, the silence is briefly audible. Both traditions are trying to help you hear it more reliably. Not by eliminating the noise is part of what it means to be a human being with a mind and a life, but by developing the capacity to hear the silence beneath the noise, to know it is there, to return to it, not permanently, not forever, but when you need it, and you often need it at night, when the noise of the day has reduced, but the noise of the mind has not yet followed. When the silence is close, it is always close, but the habit of noise keeps reaching for something to fill it. Tonight, you might allow the silence to be what it is, not empty, not threatening, not a void to be filled, but a space in which the mind can finally, gently put down what it has been carrying. It will still be there in the morning. Everything will, and you do not have to resolve it tonight. The silence is asking you for nothing, just your company. Chapter 24, The Practice of Equanimity. Equanimity is one of the most misunderstood words in either tradition. It is not the same as flatness, not the same as distance, not the same as not caring. Equanimity is a quality of balance, the ability to be fully in contact with experience, with joy, with grief, with difficulty, with beauty, without being toppled by any of it. To feel the full weight of things without being crushed by them. To be moved without being swept away. The Stoics called it ataraxia, freedom from mental turmoil, but it was not absence of feeling, it was feeling without the distortion of excessive passion. The capacity to stand in the middle of things, to see them clearly, and to respond from that clarity rather than from the noise. Marcus Aurelius practiced this every morning. He would mentally prepare for difficulty, anticipate the irritating people, the setbacks, the circumstances that would try his patience, not to dread them, but to meet them with less surprise. The preparation was a kind of pre-building of equanimity. He was training the response before the stimulus arrived. The Buddhists placed equanimity, upekkha, as the fourth of the four divine abodes, the four qualities of heart they most prized. And they were specific about what it was not. It was not the peace of one who stands far away from suffering. It was the peace of one who stands close to suffering and is not destroyed by proximity. The image they used was of a person watching a fire, not cold enough to feel nothing, not close enough to be burned, at exactly the right distance to see clearly and respond wisely. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. You are held. The most interesting thing about equanimity is that it is not built by avoiding difficult things. It is built by meeting them. Each time you feel the first flare of reactivity and pause, just a breath, just a moment, and return to something steadier within yourself, the equanimity grows. Not dramatically, in small, cumulative degrees. Over time, the practiced person finds that the flare still comes. Equanimity does not eliminate the flare, but the flare does not spread into a conflagration. It rises, is seen, and subsides. And the person is still standing, still thinking clearly, still able to choose. This is what the Stoics were building through their morning writing and evening review. This is what the Buddhists were building through their sitting practice and their attention to breath, the same quality, the same stability. And the interesting thing about equanimity is that it also changes how you receive good things. A person with equanimity can be genuinely, fully delighted by a beautiful day without needing it to last forever. Can love another person with complete presence without fear of eventual loss tightening every moment into a kind of bracing. Equanimity does not flatten the peaks of experience. It allows you to inhabit them more completely, because you are not spending the peak bracing against its ending. That is the gift that neither tradition talks about loudly enough. That the stability they offer is not a muting of life. It is an amplification of it. A clarity that makes the ordinary more visible, the good more felt, and the difficult more bearable. This is the practice, not perfection, returning, again and again, without cruelty, to the steadiness that is already at the center of you. Chapter 25. Loneliness and the World. There is a particular kind of loneliness that belongs to thoughtful people. It is not the loneliness of isolation, of being physically alone in a room. It is the loneliness of feeling that what you carry inside is too complex or too tender or too uncertain to share with most of the people around you. You have met people who are this kind of lonely. You may be this kind of lonely yourself. Both traditions address this, not with easy reassurance, but with something more useful, an honest naming of the experience, and a reframing that makes it slightly easier to carry. The Stoics observed that the wise person would always feel a degree of separation from the crowd. Not superiority, the Stoics were careful about that distinction, but difference. The person who values what the crowd does not value, who is trying to see clearly what most people prefer not to examine, who is working to live deliberately when habit is so much easier, that person will always be, in some sense, alone in their practice. Marcus Aurelius felt this acutely. He was surrounded by people every hour of his public life and wrote in the privacy of his journal about withdrawing inward, about finding the company of his own considered mind more sustaining than the company of many who surrounded him. This is not misanthropy. He also wrote about the duty of connection, about the social nature of human beings, about how we are, by our rational nature, made for each other. But he understood that a certain quality of solitude, chosen, honest, interior, was part of what made a full life possible. Just for a moment, let your jaw soften, let the stillness hold you. The Buddhist tradition addresses loneliness through the concept of interdependence, interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh called it, the recognition that nothing exists in isolation, that you are woven from the actions of thousands of people you have never met, the farmers who grew your food, the teachers who shaped your language, the ancestors whose choices created the conditions of your birth. This does not dissolve the feeling of loneliness, but it quietly undermines the story that accompanies it. The story that says, I am separate, I am on my own, no one truly understands. If you are woven from all of that, if the deepest level of what you are includes the world that made you, then the solitude is real, but the isolation is a kind of optical illusion. Both traditions also offer community as a partial answer to loneliness. The Stoics gathered in the Stoa. They wrote letters across centuries. They created a conversation across time that still feels, when you read their words at night, like a kind of companionship. The Buddhist tradition created the Sangha, the community of practitioners, one of the three jewels. Not just the Buddha's teaching and not just the practice itself, but the community. Because the practice done alone is harder than the practice held in a community of shared intention. You are not practicing alone tonight. The tradition you are sitting in is very old and very large. The people who laid these ideas down were ordinary humans who were afraid and uncertain and sometimes very lonely. And they worked it through and left the work for you. That is not nothing. It is, in its way, a kind of company. Consider what it means to be in genuine conversation with someone who died centuries ago, not in a mystical sense. Simply in the sense that when you read Seneca's words about the wastefulness of a distracted life and recognize yourself in them, something crosses time. An understanding is shared, a recognition. The particular quality of a fellow human mind arriving, across the distance of centuries, at the same question you are sitting with tonight. That is the conversation these traditions have always been, not a set of fixed answers to memorize, a living exchange across time and culture between people trying honestly to understand how to be here. The loneliness of the thoughtful person is real. It is not pathological. It is the natural result of taking the examined life seriously in a world that does not always make space for examination. But it is not isolation. It is, in a sense, the price of membership in a conversation that has been going on for 25 centuries. And tonight, you are part of that conversation, simply by being here, simply by being willing to sit with these ideas in the quiet. You are, in the truest sense, not alone. Chapter 26, Forgiveness without Forgetting. The word forgiveness is complicated. It has been used to demand too much of people who have been genuinely harmed. And it has been withheld unnecessarily by people whose grip on a grievance is hurting no one as much as it is hurting them. Both traditions understand this complexity. Neither of them demands that you pretend harm did not happen. Neither of them asks you to erase what is true. But both of them observe that the carrying of unforgiven harm, the ongoing effort of maintaining resentment, of rehearsing grievances, of keeping the wound fresh through repeated reopening, extracts a cost from the one who carries it, not from the one who caused it. The Stoic framing is perhaps the most clear. When you spend energy on resentment, what are you spending it on? An event that has already concluded. A person who may be entirely unaware of your ongoing rehearsal of their offense. The energy is real, the cost is real, the return is nothing. This is not to say that anger was not justified. It may have been entirely justified. The Stoics are not asking whether your grievance is fair. They are asking whether maintaining it is useful to you. Seneca wrote about anger with unusual psychological precision. He said that anger is often a secondary emotion, that beneath it, almost always, is hurt or fear or grief, and that the anger is the mind's way of giving that more vulnerable emotion somewhere to go. The person who has been betrayed does not just feel angry, they feel the specific pain of betrayal, the rupture in their sense of how the world works, how relationships work, how they themselves are regarded. The anger is easier to hold than that. It gives the pain somewhere to go, something to do. Notice the breath. Let the next one come a little softer. The Buddhist teaching on forgiveness is rooted in the understanding of karma, not in a cosmic reward sense, but in the simple observation that holding on to resentment produces more suffering in the one who holds it. The resentment itself is a form of craving, a craving for the past to have been different. And craving, as always, produces dukkha. The practice that emerges from this is loving-kindness, metta, the deliberate, often difficult extension of goodwill even toward those who have caused harm, not because they deserve it, because you deserve to be free of the weight of withholding it. There is a person, and you may know them, or you may be thinking of yourself, who has been carrying a particular anger for years, a real anger, sourced in something that genuinely happened. And the carrying of it has become, over time, a kind of identity. The anger has become part of the story of who they are. The forgiveness being suggested here is not the erasure of that story. It is not the revision of what happened into something it was not. It is the recognition that the story can be true, the harm was real, and you can still choose to stop carrying it in a way that hurts only you. Forgiveness, in this understanding, is not a gift to the person who hurt you. It is a door you open so you can leave the room. You do not have to walk through it tonight, but you might notice that the door is there. Chapter 27. Trauma, Memory, and Calm. There is something the body knows that the mind is sometimes slow to recognize. Bessel van der Kolk, who spent his career studying the aftermath of traumatic experience, found that the body holds memory in ways that are not narrative, not stored as a story you can tell yourself. Stored in the nervous system itself, in the startle you cannot explain, in the tightness in the chest that arrives without a clear cause, in the way certain sounds or certain silences can move you backward in time before you have consciously registered what triggered it. He was not the first person to notice this. The Stoics and the Buddhists both recognized, in their ways, that the body carries what the mind has not yet processed. The Stoic response to this is grounded in their understanding of impressions. When something happens that touches a deep fear or a deep wound, the impression that forms is not a neutral one. It arrives already colored by history, by everything similar that came before. The practice, which is genuinely difficult with old wounds, is to try to see the impression for what it is, to examine it slowly and gently before acting from it. This is harder with trauma than with ordinary difficulty. The Stoics understood that. They did not claim the practice was equally available to everyone in every circumstance. But they did believe that the direction toward examination, toward the naming of what is actually happening rather than the acting out of it, was always worthwhile. The Buddhist understanding of trauma is embedded in the teaching on samskaras, the mental impressions left by past experience. These impressions are not neutral, they shape perception. They tilt the mind towards certain kinds of seeing and away from others. And they operate largely below the level of conscious choice. The practice is not to eliminate these impressions, that is not possible, but to notice them, to recognize when a particular feeling or response arises, that it may be carrying history, that the size of the reaction may not match the size of the present moment, that something old is asking to be seen. Let your breath find its own rhythm. You do not have to manage it. Just notice it. Both traditions understand that healing from deep wounds is not simply a matter of intellectual understanding. The Stoic examination only goes so far when the wound is in the nervous system. The Buddhist observation only goes so far when the body is still bracing. What both traditions do offer, and this is not nothing, is a quality of presence with what is happening. The willingness to be with the experience as it is, rather than fighting it or fleeing it. The capacity to let what arises be what it is, without adding a story of shame or danger on top of it. This quality of presence is in fact close to what modern trauma therapies describe as the primary ingredient of healing. The felt sense of safety, the ability to experience what is difficult without it overwhelming the system entirely. You are safe enough to simply rest. Nothing here requires more than that. The old weight does not have to be carried perfectly. It does not have to be resolved tonight. It only asks to be acknowledged, gently, without cruelty. The way you might acknowledge a very old and very tired thing that has been following you for a long time. Ah, there you are. I see you. I am not fighting you tonight. That acknowledgement is often enough to allow some small softening, and small softenings accumulated over time are how the weight eventually lessens. Chapter 28. The Body That Breathes. You have been breathing this entire time, without deciding to, without effort, without management. The body has been doing what it always does, cycling air, sustaining itself, continuing the work of being alive. This is not a small thing. It is, in fact, the foundation of everything both traditions point toward. The breath is the one thing that exists simultaneously in the voluntary and involuntary realms. You can control it within limits, slow it, deepen it, hold it. And it will also go on without you, returning to its own rhythm the moment you stop attending to it. This makes it uniquely useful for practice. The Buddhist tradition placed breathwork at the center of its meditative practice almost from the beginning. The technique is called anapanasati, mindfulness of breath. The practitioner does not force the breath into any particular pattern. They observe it. In, out, the sensation at the nostrils, the rise and fall of the chest or belly, the slight pause at the end of each exhale before the next inhale begins. The observation sounds simple. In practice, it reveals a great deal, because the mind very quickly wanders from the breath. A thought arises, the attention follows it. And then, at some point, the practitioner notices they have wandered, and they return, gently, without judgment, back to the breath. That act of noticing and returning, that is the practice. Not the staying, the returning. Every time you wander and return, you are building something, not willpower. Equanimity. The capacity to notice where the mind has gone without drama and come back. And if you do this enough times, over days and years of practice, the capacity becomes available in the rest of life too. When the mind wanders into anxiety, you notice it has wandered. When it wanders into regret, you notice. And you can return gently without requiring that it not have wandered in the first place. Let your next breath come exactly as it comes. Not slower, not deeper, just exactly as it is. The Stoics did not practice breath meditation in the Buddhist sense, but they had their own version of the return. Marcus Aurelius, in his morning writing, was doing something structurally similar. He had wandered into the night's dreams, into the habits of mind that came without choosing, and he was returning to his values, to his actual priorities, to the person he was trying to be. The journal was a breath practice for the mind. You do not have to meditate in the formal sense tonight. You do not have to do anything with your breath except what you have always done. Let it happen. But if you want to try something small just for these next few paragraphs, you might place a gentle attention on the sensation of breathing, not forcing anything, not judging anything. Just noticing the breath as it rises and as it falls. And when the mind wanders, and it will, notice that it has wandered and come back. That is the entire practice. Rise and fall, wander and return. The body is doing it already. All you are adding is a little attention, a little company for the breath that has been breathing you faithfully all your life. Here is something worth noticing, if you choose to notice it now. In this moment, the breath is happening. It was happening while you thought about the day, while the mind ran its calculations. While worry and planning and memory and anticipation moved through you like weather, through all of that, the breath continued. It did not require your cooperation. It did not need your management. It simply proceeded. This is the body's own form of equanimity, a steadiness that underlies all the movement of the mind. And the breath is its most visible expression, the one thing you can always return to in any moment as evidence that beneath the noise something simple and faithful continues. Both traditions understood this. The Buddhists made it the central object of practice. The Stoics understood the importance of the pause, the breath taken before responding, the moment of return to what is actually here before acting from what feels urgent. In either case, the body is the anchor, and the anchor is always present. You do not have to do anything with this. The breath will continue. The body will go on with its quiet work. All that is being offered is the small permission to notice it. To let that noticing be, for these next few moments, the only thing required of you. Chapter 29, Wisdom After Loss. Loss changes a person, not always in the ways we expect, and not always in the direction of diminishment. There is a particular quality of understanding that seems to arrive only through loss, not through reading about loss or thinking about loss or preparing for loss, through actually experiencing it. The world, seen from the other side of something genuinely important, looks different, more textured, more precious in its specificity. Both traditions have thought deeply about why this is and what it means. The Stoics understood loss as a teacher of proportion. When Epictetus spoke about holding things lightly, using his image of the traveller who holds the reins loosely, he was offering a practice for before the loss. But the people who came to him after loss found something too. They found that the loss had, in some cases, done the Stoic work for them, had stripped away the pretension that any of it was permanent, and left them with a clearer view of what actually mattered. The clarity that arrives after grief is not the same as the calm before it. It has a different texture, a different gravity. The person who has loved and lost carries something that the person who has not yet loved fully cannot quite reach. A tenderness toward the ordinary, a sense of the weight of moments that used to feel weightless. Seneca, near the end of his life, knowing that his time was short, that his enemies in Rome were closing in, wrote his letters to his friend Lucilius with an urgency that was also a kind of gratitude. The urgency was not panic, it was clarity. He was very clear about what mattered, because everything that did not matter had been stripped away. Let your shoulders drop, let the breath be what it is. The Buddhist teaching on loss runs through the concept of impermanence in a different way than it does in ordinary philosophy. The Buddhist insight is not just that everything ends. It is that the ending is not separate from the thing itself. The flower's beauty is not diminished by its brevity. It is, in some ways, constituted by it. What is eternal is not beautiful in the way that what is temporary is beautiful. The cherry blossom falls within days of blooming. The Japanese have built an entire aesthetic around this mono no aware, the pathos of things. The gentle sadness of impermanence that is also, somehow, a form of love. The sadness and the love are not opposites. They are the same feeling, seen from different angles. Think of what you have lost that has also taught you. Not the teaching you would have chosen, not the lesson you would have requested, but the understanding that arrived, without your permission, in the aftermath, about what is real, about what lasts, about what you actually value when the pretense is gone. That understanding is wisdom, not theoretical, not borrowed from a book, earned. Both traditions know that wisdom of this kind cannot be fully transmitted. It can be pointed at. The words can gesture toward the door. But the understanding itself arrives through living, through the accumulation of exactly the kind of experience you have been gathering across the years of your life. You are older than you were, and something in you knows more than your mind has found words for. There is a moment that sometimes arrives quietly after years of accumulation. A conversation with a younger person, a child, a colleague, someone decades behind you in years, in which you hear them speaking about a fear or a confusion or a particular ache, and you recognize it exactly. You were there once. You carried the same thing. And you realize in that moment that you made it through. That the weight you thought would crush you did not. That the loss you thought was final was not the end of the story. That the uncertainty you felt at 30 or 40 or 50 which felt so enormous, so unresolvable, was eventually met, not solved necessarily, but met and absorbed and transformed into something you now carry lightly without even noticing. That is wisdom after loss. That is the particular knowing that only years can give. Both traditions honor this. The Stoic tradition values the elder who has been tested, who has endured and remained, who carries practical wisdom in the body rather than only in the mind. The Buddhist tradition speaks of the Sangha's elders, those whose years of practice have softened them in a particular way, made them at once simpler and deeper. You may not feel like a person of wisdom. Most people who carry it do not feel it in themselves. But the fact that you are here, still listening, still willing to sit with these questions, that is not nothing. That knowing is welcome here tonight. Chapter 30. When thoughts pass by. You have a thought right now, probably several. Not the thoughts you are reading, something else running parallel, a brief image, a name, a fragment of tomorrow's plan, a memory that surfaced without invitation. This is normal. This is what the mind does. It produces a continuous stream of content, not because something is wrong with you, but because that is what minds do. They generate, they process. They process even when you would prefer they didn't. The Stoic approach to this stream is to pay attention to the quality of the thoughts, to notice which thoughts are producing equanimity and which are producing disturbance, and to examine the disturbing ones, not to suppress them, but to test them. Is this thought accurate? Is it proportional? Is it based on something real, or is it a habit the mind runs because the habit has never been questioned? That examination is not aggressive. It is curious. The way a careful person might examine an unfamiliar object. Turning it over, looking at it from different angles, not deciding in advance what it is. The Buddhist approach to the thought stream is different. Rather than examining the content of each thought, it asks you to change your relationship to the stream itself. To notice that thoughts are arising and passing, arising and passing, each one complete in itself and then gone. The trick, and it is a real trick requiring practice, is to observe this without latching on, to let the thought arise the way a sound arises. You hear it, it passes. You do not follow it down the corridor of where it leads. Let your jaw soften now. Let the next breath arrive exactly when it wants to. Here is a small thing to notice. Right now, in this moment, you are listening to this narration. The thoughts that arise in the background are not interruptions. They are just more thoughts. They are part of the stream, and they are passing even as they arise. You do not have to make them stop. You only have to notice that you do not have to follow them. The Stoic and the Buddhist would agree on this in their different ways. The thought is not you, the feeling is not you. They are things that arise in the awareness that is you. And awareness itself, the thing that is watching the thoughts, the thing that noticed just now that a thought was passing. Awareness is not a thought. It is the space in which thoughts move. That space is quiet. Even right now, beneath all the mental movement, the space is quiet. Both traditions are asking you simply to notice that, to turn the attention gently toward the space rather than the content, toward the sky rather than the weather. The weather will do what weather does. The sky remains. Here is something that might be useful to try right now if you are still awake enough to try it. Without forcing anything, without requiring the mind to quiet, simply notice one thought as it passes, whatever thought is present, and see if you can observe it the way you might observe a word written on water. The word is real. The water is also real. And the water remains when the word has gone. Notice that you were able to do that, that some part of you was watching the thought rather than being the thought. That is the capacity both traditions have been cultivating for centuries, and you just used it. Without training, without a monastery, in the dark, at the end of a long day. That is what the Buddhist teachers call our original nature. Not something to be achieved, something to be recognized. And when thoughts pass by tonight, as they will, when the mind offers up its inventory of worries and unfinished business and early morning plans, you might simply watch, the way you would watch clouds from a window. Present, interested, not concerned. They are passing. All of them are passing. The calm observer is closer than you think. Chapter 31, The Calm Observer. Every major contemplative tradition and a growing number of psychological frameworks describe something similar. There is a part of you that watches, not the part that thinks or plans or worries or reminds you of what you said wrong in 2009. A quieter part. The part that notices when you are angry, that watches your emotions arrive and pass the way a doorman watches traffic, present, aware, not consumed. The Stoics called it the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the rational governing center of the self. It was not the emotions, not the impulses. It was the capacity to observe them and choose how to respond. Marcus Aurelius returned to this capacity again and again in his journal. The Citadel, the inner witness, the thing that circumstance could not touch. The Buddhists called it, in different contexts, the witnessing awareness, or simply mind. Not the thinking mind, the mind that is aware of thinking. The consciousness that underlies the specific contents of consciousness. Both are describing a real experience. You have had it. The moment when you caught yourself reacting and paused. The moment when you noticed your thoughts with enough distance to wonder where they were coming from. The moment when, in the middle of strong emotion, something in you remained calm. That was the observer. It is not foreign to you. It is your most native experience. In some ways, more native than the stories you tell about yourself, more native than the roles you play, more native than the versions of yourself you show different people in different contexts. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. The observer is already present. It has been here the whole time. Both traditions tried to cultivate the observer's presence, not to create it, it is already there, but to make it more reliably accessible, to strengthen the capacity to return to it, especially when the conditions are difficult and the reactive mind wants to take over. The Stoic method: examine your impressions. When something happens and a strong reaction arises, pause. Ask what is actually true here. Test the impression against reality. This examination is the observer at work. The Buddhist method: watch the arising and passing of experience without identifying with it. Let thoughts and feelings be phenomena rather than orders. This watching is the observer at rest. In practice, you probably move between the two. Sometimes you need the Stoic examination, the careful look at whether your reaction is proportional to what is real. And sometimes you need the Buddhist watching, the simple, restful presence with experience, without needing to fix or change or understand it. The observer can do both. It has always been able to do both. Tonight, the observer is watching this narration arrive. It is watching the breath move. It is watching the thoughts that arise at the edges, the lists, the worries, the brief images of tomorrow. And the observer is calm, not because everything is resolved, because observation does not require resolution. You do not need to become the calm observer. You already are. The turbulence is in the weather, not in the sky. And the sky, whatever the weather, remains. Chapter 32. Stoic Courage at Night. There is a particular kind of courage the Stoics prized above all others. Not military courage, though Marcus Aurelius knew that kind too, not physical bravado, but the quieter courage of honesty, the courage to see things as they actually are, not as you hope they are, not as you fear they are, as they actually are. This sounds simple. In practice, it is one of the most demanding things the Stoics asked of anyone, because we are all, to some degree, running interpretations of reality that make it more comfortable or more threatening than it actually is. The mind does not experience the world directly. It experiences its own account of the world, and that account is shaped by fear and hope and habit and the long sediment of everything that has happened before. The Stoic practice of courage at night is this: before sleep, bring honest attention to what is real, not what you fear, not what you hope, what is actually true. You are here. The body is breathing. The day is over. The things you worried about this week, how many of them actually arrived in the form you feared? This is not optimism. It is empiricism. The Stoic is asking you to look at the evidence. And the evidence, most nights, is that you survived, that the fears were larger than the reality, that the inner citadel held. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal something that sounds almost like a confession. He admitted that he often braced for things that never came. that the preparation for difficulty was sometimes more exhausting than the difficulty itself. He did not write this with shame. He wrote it with the dry, honest self-awareness of someone taking careful notes on his own mind. And notice what comes just after that honesty: relief. Because what is seen clearly no longer has the power of the unseen. The monster in the dark is always smaller once you have looked at it in the light. Just for a moment, let your shoulders drop. There is nothing to brace for right now. Stoic courage at night is also the courage to accept what cannot be changed. Not passively, not with defeat, but with the honest acknowledgement that some things have already happened and no amount of nighttime rehearsal will unhappen them. The past is fixed. Your relationship to it is not. There may be something from the past that you have been carrying in a way that is harder than it needs to be. Not because the thing itself was small, it may have been significant, but because the way you have been carrying it has added layers of interpretation, of self-blame, of what if I had done otherwise, that the thing itself does not require. The Stoic courage is to take those layers off, to see the thing as it was, real, past, formative, without the additional weight of the story you have built around it. That is not easy. It is one of the hardest things either tradition asks. But it is also, when it happens, one of the most complete forms of rest available. There is a particular quality that the Stoics called gravitas, a word we have borrowed in English but have somewhat diluted. In the Roman sense, it meant something closer to weight or seriousness, not heaviness. The kind of presence that comes from a person who has been tested and knows what they are made of, who does not need to perform courage because they have actually encountered difficulty and remained. You have had your own encounters with difficulty, more than you probably acknowledge to yourself on an ordinary night. The things that worried you deeply at earlier stages of life, the losses you absorbed, the recoveries you made, quietly, often without anyone watching or acknowledging. These are not nothing. They are the substance of a life examined and lived. The Stoic courage at night is, in part, the willingness to credit yourself with what you have already endured. Not boastfully, not as a defense against the next difficulty, but honestly as the evidence that when things were hard, something in you held. That evidence has been gathering for years. The inner citadel has been there the whole time. Not the rest of sleep, the rest of honesty, of seeing clearly, of finally letting the thing be what it was without demanding that the weight of it be something other than what is actually there. The night is patient. It has waited before. Chapter 33. Buddhist Release Before Sleep. Let us pause here for a moment, not to analyze, not to examine, just to feel. Right now, your body is doing something extraordinary. Without any effort on your part, it is keeping you alive. The heart is beating. The lungs are moving, the blood is warm and moving. The nervous system is carrying information through millions of pathways, doing its patient, faithful work. You do not have to do anything for this to be true. Let your attention move slowly through your body. Not to fix anything, just to notice. Notice the weight of your legs, resting where they are, the particular heaviness of the body when it is finally still. Notice your hands, whether they are open or closed. If they are closed, let them soften, not forcing, just allowing. Notice where your breath is, whether it is high in the chest or lower in the belly, and let it move wherever it naturally wants to move, without direction, without management. Let now bring to mind something you have been carrying today. Not the largest thing you carry, something medium. A worry, a regret, a small, unfinished question that has been circling. Do not solve it, do not rehearse it. Just notice that you are carrying it. And now imagine for a moment placing it down, not throwing it away, not pretending it is not yours, just setting it carefully somewhere nearby, the way you might set down a bag at the end of a long journey. You have been holding it. You can rest for now. It will be there in the morning. Feel the difference between holding and allowing. There is space in the hands when they are not gripping. There is a lightness in the chest when it is not bracing. The Buddhist teachers called this release dana, giving, offering. Not necessarily to another person, sometimes simply to the night itself, to the silence, to the impermanent river of everything that arises and passes. You have been a good carrier today. Whatever you carried, the obligations, the worries, the quiet uncertainties, you carried them through the whole of the day. You do not have to carry them into sleep. Let the breath be what it is. Let the body be held by whatever surface holds you. Let the mind be as busy as it is, or as quiet as it is, without requiring it to be otherwise. For these next few moments, your only task is to notice that you are here, that you are breathing, that nothing is demanded of you right now but presence. And if sleep comes, let it come. And if the mind wanders, let it wander. And if a worry surfaces, let it surface, and let it pass the way all things pass. You are safe enough to rest. The night is holding you. Chapter 34. Which path calms more? We have been sitting with both traditions for several hours now, and you may be wondering, as we approach the end of this conversation, which one actually helps more? Which philosophy more reliably produces the calm you are looking for? The honest answer is, it depends. Not on which is better, on which part of you is most restless right now. If your restlessness is the restlessness of a mind that feels out of control, that is spending itself on things outside its power, that is being tyrannized by circumstances it cannot govern, then the Stoic teaching is the more immediately useful medicine. Draw the line. Return to what is actually yours. The inner citadel is already there. Enter it. If your restlessness is the restlessness of a mind that has been gripping too tightly, that has been trying to manage its own experience by force, that is exhausted from the effort of controlling what cannot be controlled from the inside out, then the Buddhist teaching is the more immediately useful medicine. Soften the grip. Watch instead of fight. Let the sky be the sky. But here is what the extended study of both traditions reveals. They are not actually prescribing different things. They are prescribing the same thing from different starting points. And the same thing is this: stop adding suffering on top of what is already difficult. Stop fighting the reality of the moment with the demands of a different reality. Come into contact with what is actually here. The Stoic comes into contact by examining the accuracy of their judgments. The Buddhist comes into contact by watching the arising and passing of experience. But the destination, genuine, honest, grounded contact with the present moment, is the same. And from that contact, rest becomes possible. Not because the problems are solved, because you have stopped being somewhere else while they go unresolved. What both traditions have in common is not method, it is honesty. The willingness to see the mind as it actually is, restless, reaching, interpreting, adding layers to layers, and to respond to that reality with patience rather than judgment. The Stoic's patience is directed at the self who keeps reaching beyond the line. The Buddhist's patience is directed at the thoughts and feelings that keep arising uninvited. Both practices require the same underlying quality, the willingness to return without cruelty over and over to what is actually here. And what is actually here, in this moment, is more than enough to rest in. The room is quiet, or nearly so. The body is present, the breath is moving. These are not small things. They are, in the deepest sense, everything that is actually here. The worries are in the mind. The plans are in the mind. The regrets are in the mind. But the breath is in the body. The body is here. And the awareness that notices all of this, that calm, patient, witnessing awareness that both traditions point toward, that is here too. It has always been here. Tonight, simply, we are noticing it. Let the next breath be exactly what it is. Nothing asked of it, nothing required. There is a final thing worth naming. Both traditions, at their depths, describe the same basic ground, a quality of awareness that is not disturbed by what arises within it. That is not defined by its contents. That is, in some sense, prior to the division between self and world, between subject and object, between the one who suffers and the suffering. The Stoics found this in the rational faculty. The Buddhists found it in Buddha nature, in Rigpa, in the awareness that underlies all experience. They use different words. They use different methods. They lived in different centuries, on different sides of the world, but they were pointing at the same light. and you have access to that light. Not because you have studied the right philosophy or meditated for the right number of hours or achieved the right understanding, but because it is the ground of what you are. Already there, always there, accessible in any breath. Both paths lead home. The one that resonates tonight is the right one for tonight. And the night is still long. The quiet is still here. Chapter 35, Resting Beyond Comparison. Tonight, we explored two roads to calm. We did not decide between them. We let them sit beside each other, and we noticed what they shared. What they shared is worth carrying forward, not as a schedule or a program, but as 7 small practices. 7 ways of letting both traditions do their quiet work in the ordinary texture of a day. Each one has a name, not a number, because these are not steps in a sequence. They are qualities. And qualities can be visited in any order, revisited whenever the day calls for them, set down and picked up again without any sense of having failed or fallen behind. The line. This is the Stoics' practice, and it is also the simplest. At some point today, not in a formal way, just in a breath of honest attention, notice one thing you have been spending yourself on that does not belong to you, a problem that is not yours to solve, an outcome you cannot govern, a person's decision that was always theirs to make. Just notice it. Name it inwardly. This is not mine. You do not have to release it fully. Just seeing it clearly begins the work, the watch. This is closer to the Buddhist practice, though it requires no cushion and no posture. When a difficult feeling arrives today, tightness in the chest, the familiar flutter of worry, an irritation that rises without a clear cause, do not analyze it, do not suppress it. Just watch it for 30 seconds as a physical sensation. Where is it in the body? Is it moving or still? What happens to it when you look directly at it instead of looking away? The watching itself is the medicine. The honest evening. Before sleep, ask one question, not demanding an answer, just opening the door. How did I actually spend my energy today? Not a verdict, not a list of failures, just an honest look. The way Seneca looked at his own days, the way Marcus Aurelius looked at his. Then close the door. Let the evening be complete. The accounting is not for guilt, it is for clarity. The ordinary moment. At some point today, something small will happen that you would normally pass through without noticing. A particular quality of light. The sound of rain or wind or a passing voice. The warmth of a cup in your hands. Stop, just for 3 seconds. Say nothing. The Buddhist teachers called this presence. The Stoics called it attention to what is real. You can call it whatever you want. The practice is simply to feel it fully before it passes. The return. This is the core of both traditions, dressed in the simplest possible clothing. When you notice your mind has wandered into worry, into replay, into the low hum of planning. Just notice that it has wandered, and return, not with judgment, without ceremony. Just, there I went, and here I am again. The return is the practice, not the staying. Every time you wander and return, something is being built. It is called equanimity. Equanimity. And it takes a long time, and it is built entirely from moments exactly like this one. The open hand. Once today, find a moment to extend genuine goodwill to someone you have been holding with tension. This does not require a conversation or a gesture. It requires only a thought held for a few seconds with sincerity. I wish this person ease, not because they deserve it from you, not because the tension was your fault, because the clenching costs you more than it costs them, and the open hand is lighter than the closed one. The two roads, one breath. Tonight, before sleep, whenever tonight arrives, do something from each tradition in the same breath. Ask, what is actually in my power right now? And let the answer be simple. Only this. Only the breath. Only the noticing. And then simply watch the breath move. The Stoic, asking. The Buddhist, watching. Both in the space of one inhale and one exhale. That is the whole practice. That is both traditions distilled to a single breath offered to the night. These 7 qualities are not a curriculum. They are companions. You will find some of them useful on certain days and irrelevant on others. That is fine. Return to the ones that fit the weather of the week you are having, and know that the returning itself to any of them at any time without requiring that you have been consistent is the tradition at work. Both roads lead here, and here is enough. Chapter 36, A Quiet Mind Remains. We began tonight in a quiet room. Not this room, the room you carry inside yourself, the one that exists at the edge of sleep, when the day has finished and the night has not yet claimed you, and something surfaces that the hours would not let you feel. That room is where both traditions were born, not in the lecture halls of Athens or the monasteries of ancient India, in the private, unwitnessed hours of individual human beings who were tired and uncertain and trying to understand how to live. Marcus Aurelius wrote in that room, in the flickering light of a military tent, at the edge of an empire he did not ask for, and a life more demanding than anyone should have had to carry. The Buddha sat in that room, under a fig tree, watching his own mind the way you might watch a river clear after rain, waiting for the current to still. Epictetus found that room in the years of enslavement, when the only territory that was truly his was the interior one, and he discovered, to his surprise, that it was enough. Seneca returned to that room at the end, when the emperor's order had come and time was short, and he sat with his friends and wrote about the ordinary days with a gratitude that only the end can produce. They were all in the same room you are in tonight. Let the weight of your body settle into what holds you. Let the breath move as it wants to move. We said at the beginning that there was a question sitting beneath the comparison of these two traditions. Not which path is better, something quieter. Here is what that question is, and here is its answer. The question is, what have I been waiting for permission to release? The Stoic answer, you have permission to stop managing what is not yours to manage. The line has always been clear. You simply forgot to draw it. And drawing it tonight, even lightly, even imperfectly, is enough. The Buddhist answer, you have permission to stop fighting your own experience. The awareness that watches is already calm. You simply forgot to rest in it. Both of these are the same permission. You are allowed to let tonight be enough. Not perfect, not resolved, not certain, but enough. The worries will be there in the morning. The unfinished things will wait. The questions you have been carrying will still carry whatever weight they carry, and you will return to them with whatever wisdom the night brings. But right now, in this moment, the only thing being asked of you is rest. Not the heroic rest of someone who has earned it through sufficient achievement. The ordinary rest of a person who has been alive for one more day, who has felt what they felt, who carried what they carried, who is here, still breathing, still present, still the watching awareness beneath all the weather. Both traditions, across their long history, have been trying to say the same thing in different languages. You do not have to become anything. You only have to rest in what you already are. Think of all the voices across time who have sat in their version of this same quiet room. Epictetus with his lamp, writing sentences that would outlast Rome. Thich Nhat Hanh in exile, practicing peace in a country that was not his because he had learned that peace does not depend on where you are. Marcus Aurelius in his tent, asking himself the same questions you are sitting with tonight, and finding in the asking a kind of steadiness that no circumstance could entirely remove. They are not distant from you. They are the company of the long conversation, and you are, in this moment, part of it. The tradition that was passed on to you tonight did not begin with books or scholars. It began with a human being, alone in the quiet, asking, is it possible to find peace in the midst of this? Is it possible to be present with difficulty without being destroyed by it? Is it possible to rest, truly rest, even when things are unresolved? And the answer, worked out patiently across centuries, is yes. Not easily, not without practice, not without returning over and over to what is actually here. But yes, that yes is what you are resting in now. The mind that has been seeking quiet all evening was never as far from quiet as it thought. The quiet was here. It was always here. Just beneath the questions, just beneath the thoughts, just beneath the long day and the accumulated weight of years. In the breath that has been breathing you all along, sleep now.